Good afternoon. Welcome to the NTSB Conference Center. Thank you, Chairman Sumwalt, and your team for hosting us, and Deidre's up in the booth, and I appreciate all of the attendees that are via webcast. I think last time we were here, we had about twice as many people on the webcast as we do in person, and so we really appreciate that opportunity to reach people who are not here in DC. The first individual that I have the opportunity to introduce, the privilege to introduce, is Chairman Robert L. Sumwalt of the National Transportation Safety Board. I had the privilege to work with Robert for 8 years, and Robert is one of the people in the world who knew exactly what he wanted to be when he grew up, and he achieved that. He read NTSB reports in the library at the University of South Carolina, and he is here as the chairman of the NTSB today. And we couldn't have any more committed safety leader leading this organization, and I say that from absolute firsthand experience. Just a true class act as a human being and as a leader and as a safety investigator. So we're really excited to welcome Robert to share his insights and observations with us, and I'm happy to say welcome to my friend.
Thank you. Oh, wow. Debbie, thank you for that great introduction. It's wonderful to be back in this very room with you where we have spent so many hours hashing out accident reports and crash reports. So thank you very much. Welcome to the NTSB's Boardroom and Conference Center. I think it's apropos that you all are back here again. We're delighted to host you. After all, we both share the same goals of preventing crashes, reducing injuries, and saving lives. And I applaud what you're doing, because the work that you're doing, it does save lives, and it does matter, and it does make a difference. I've been asked to make do a safety briefing, and let's go back to this one here. Couldn't think of a very original title, so we'll just say welcome remarks. I do want to give a safety briefing because we are in the safety business. If you need to get out of this building in the event of an emergency, there are exits here and here. And I always like to note that these exits don't immediately take you outside. They will take you through a maze of hallways, but eventually you will get outside. But depending on the nature of the emergency, it may be better to use the exit through which you entered, which is out here. There's an AED out in the hallway. There are telephones if you're walking out. There are a bank of 3 telephones. If your cell phone doesn't work and you need to dial 911, there's a placard there that says dial 9 to get out, and then 911. We will meet. I thought originally we'd meet at the Irish Pub at the wharf, but Debbie said no, that's not a good idea. We'll gather at the Mandarin Oriental Hotel. That way we can all find each other. It's far enough away from this building so we can meet safely. You know, more than 95% of the nation's of the fatalities in our transportation system are roadway related. And therefore, it should be no surprise at all that the majority of the items on our most wanted list, 7 of the 10 items on the most wanted list, directly relate to improving highway safety. As I think many of you are aware, most of you are aware, last year we completed a study on speeding. It was a seminal report on speeding, and we've even heard great remarks from people in this room and people that are watching to talk about that report and how valuable that report is being in shaping legislation. Dr. Ivan Chung is seated here. Ivan, if you don't mind standing, thank you so much for your hard work on this. Ivan was the co-principal investigator on this study. I point Ivan out because I know that sometime during the day in the break you'd like to go talk to Ivan. We completed last month a special investigation report on selected issues in school bus transportation safety, and we looked at 2 fairly recent crashes. They happened 20 days apart, one in Baltimore, one in Chattanooga, of which a total of 12 people died in those crashes. And there were a number of safety issues that special investigation report uncovered. Certainly in the case of the Baltimore crash, the driver was medically unfit. He fraudulently obtained his CDL over many years, used different names and social security numbers to obtain a CDL illegally. He was unfit to drive. He had a record of seizures since childhood, and in fact, he had had a seizure 5 days before the fatal crash. And people at the company witnessed his seizure. They told him to go home and not come back until he had a medical release, and he still came back the next day, in fact, and continued to drive. And we think he had a seizure, which led to the crash. Speeding was a factor in both of the crashes. Again, it goes back to our speeding study. We continue to see that to be an issue. Cell phone use while driving, that was the case in the Chattanooga crash. The driver is driving a school bus, which of course has a big wheel that probably takes some force to turn the wheel, and he was on the cell phone, and even though he said that he was using it wirelessly, Bluetooth, we don't believe that. We think he was actually trying to hold it. And at one point, he's speeding around a back road that had a speed limit of 30 miles an hour. He's doing about 45, going around winding roads. And at some point, the steering wheel inputs required about 300 degrees per second of wheel movement, and he's probably trying to hold a phone to his ear. Oversight by the school district and the contracted student transportation service providers. The oversight was virtually non-existent. We thought that a forward collision avoidance system with automatic emergency braking would have mitigated the effects of the Baltimore crash. Electronic stability controls. We feel that would have aided in the case of the Chattanooga driver, where he's trying to go around these winding roads at high speed, that the electronic stability controls would have helped the driver to retain control of the bus. And of course, the issue of lap shoulder belts. And I think that was really a significant finding and recommendation. A finding was properly worn lap shoulder belts provide the highest level of protection for school bus passengers in all crash scenarios, including frontal, side, and rear impacts and rollovers. And of course, for years we've known the value of the compartmentalization, which probably works fairly well in a forward or rear collision, but it doesn't work very well in side impacts or rollovers because, of course, the occupant is ejected from the seating compartment. And we did issue recommendations to the states that all newly purchased school buses, large school buses, should be equipped with lap shoulder belts. That night, the night of the board meeting, I saw on NBC Nightly News, someone said, kids grow up being belted in three-point belts in cars. It's high time that they have the same safety afforded to them on school buses. And I agree with that person, whoever it is. And you're exactly right. Thank you. So let me show you this. Dr. Chris Poland is here, and Chris did these simulations a few years ago for some school bus crashes that we looked at. There's a lot going on in these, but one will show you how just a lap belt alone still leads to significant flailing of the arms, the legs, the upper body, the torso. And then you'll see in the first simulation how no restraint at all. This was a side impact. School bus was struck by a dump truck, and there were a few fatalities in that one, Chesterfield, New Jersey. But there's a lot going on, and so let's just watch this first simulation. Chris is here, and there she is in the back. All right, so look at how much you're moved around just with a lap belt, and you also see. So the one on the left. Okay, let's watch this. We still get a lot of flailing with only a lap belt. And look what happens if you're unbelted. soft tissue meets hard object, usually not a good outcome. So let's look now and see how a lap shoulder belt in another crash can help significantly. There's still some flailing of the arms and the legs, but the torso remains fairly well protected. And that's why I was very pleased to see that we did come out and issue this recommendation. Now, seat belts, lap shoulder belts are great, but they have to be worn to be effective. And in March, we launched to a motor coach accident in Loxley, Alabama. That's about halfway between Pensacola and Mobile. And this was a high school band going from Disney World back to home in Houston. The crash happened about 5:30 in the morning and going on an interstate. I think it's I-10, and it careened off into a ravine. The driver was fatally injured, and just from looking at that, I would imagine maybe the occupiable space was compromised. But of the occupants, of the remaining occupants, the 46, 47 passengers on the bus, I will say that only a very, very, very small percentage were actually wearing the lap shoulder belts. Since 2016 or so, there's been a requirement that new school buses, or excuse me, new large buses over 26,000 pounds must be equipped with lap shoulder belts. This was a 2018 bus, so it should have, it had the lap shoulder belts installed, but again, they don't do any good if you don't wear them. And we've seen that in other crashes as well. The buses have the belts, but people aren't wearing them. And I think there's a false sense of security that when you're in this fairly large and comfortable compartment, that you don't need to wear the belts. So that's something that I think we need to be working on to get people to actually wear them. I noticed last week I was in London, and my wife was with me, and when she would get in a taxi cab, she didn't want to put on her seatbelt because she felt this sense of security, and I'd say, put on your seatbelt. But Las Vegas, let's talk about autonomous vehicles. I know there's a lot of interest in that. We launched in November to, as you can see, maybe you can see here, see this, that says it's some sort of a vehicle in Las Vegas that says, "Look, Ma, no driver." And that was on when they were launching the service, and less than 2 hours later, they had collided with a truck. It's a little shuttle bus, and it was autonomous. And what happened there was we are investigating it, but the factual part of the investigation would reveal that the white truck there started backing up. Well, if there were a human driver driving the other vehicle, they would likely recognize, oh, wait a minute, this truck's backing up, so maybe I need not get too close to it. Or maybe you'd lay on your horn or something like that. You would do everything you could to get out of that situation. We can't always program a machine to think like a human, so we will be looking at that. A few days later, well, let's see, in March, of course, this one's a notorious event here, an Uber test vehicle being operated in the self-driving mode, and has recently been reported in the news. The Tempe Police Department released just last week that the driver was watching something like Dancing with the Stars or something like that, instead of being there to actually monitor what the car was supposed to be doing. And so we have not independently verified, but that's what's being reported. Of course, Mountain View happened a few days later. We originally launched to Mountain View to look at the issues associated with the battery. The battery it continued to reignite. The accident the crash was around 9:30 in the morning. At 11 o'clock in the morning, while still on scene, the battery reignited. It reignited again at 1:30. It was taken to the storage yard where 4 p.m. the day of the crash, the battery reignited, and finally 5 days after the crash, while still at the storage yard, it ignited again. So we're concerned about that, but while being there to investigate the battery aspects of it, we learned some other issues associated with the driver performance and the automation performance. So we are interested in that. While we're talking about batteries, in May there was a horrendous crash in Fort Lauderdale with three young boys, three young males, and the car was in a 30-mile-an-hour zone with an advisory marking for 25 miles an hour around the curve. At one point, the car had reached 116 miles per hour, and unfortunately, there was a crash with 2 fatalities, but we are looking at the performance of the battery there as well. So there are a lot of safety issues that we are potentially interested in with respect to the autonomous vehicles, and you can see a list of those. And finally, I want to talk about the vulnerable road users. It's a little bit hard to read that, but I did the math on it. It looks like if you take the pedestrian fatalities, which is about 5,900. This is DOT data from 2016. Motorcycles about 5,200. Pedal cycles 840. Altogether, that's about 30. That's over a third of roadway-related fatalities are occurring with the vulnerable road users. And so you look at these guys here. I took that picture last week when I was in London. Some people probably believe that because they don't recognize that that's who that is. But we, this fall, will be completing a study, a safety investigation report of pedestrian injuries and fatalities. We think for Christmas present this year, sometime this fall, we will have completed a safety study on motorcycles. And the board has just in the last few months approved a safety study of bicycle safety. And I'm not sure why that dog is on the back of that guy's head or back, but he is. And so I think that's another hazard we need to look at, Ivan. This dog's actually catching the bicyclist. So we are very interested in vulnerable road users. And again, that's a third of the fatalities that are occurring on our nation's roadways. And I'm glad to know that the NTSB is taking a good look at that. Finally, I'm always inspired by a saying that I think it's in the Hebrew writings. It says, "Whoever saves a life, it is as if he has saved an entire world." And just remember that you don't have to go out and solve world hunger. You don't have to go out and solve poverty. All you need to do is keep just one person from dying. And if you have done that, you have saved an entire world. So your work, it is so important. It does matter. It does make a difference. And it does save lives. Thank you and welcome to this conference. Debbie, thank you.
Robert, thank you. Really exciting to give us a preview about what you're working on, and for all of the NTSB leaders and the staff that work so hard on these products. The Road to Zero Coalition is taking your reports, taking your work. We're issuing priority statements, safety priority statements, and as an example, the steering group just talked about vulnerable road users, and we talked about speed this morning as priority statements based on some of the work that you all did on speed last year. So the work that you all do really informs and is a platform for so many others. So thank you for your leadership and thank you for having us today. And now you can see why he is the dream chairman for his dream job. So our next speaker is Kathy Gautreaux, and Kathy's a second-ranking leader at the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. She's really responsible for the day-to-day operations of the organization. She's got background in law enforcement with the trucking industry, and her focus is really on keeping people safe on the roadways and making sure that those trucks and buses that are out there are safe, and they're operating with all of us, next to all of us on the roadways. I'm showing my age here, but Kathy and I have known each other for many years. When I was actually working on the Senate Commerce Committee, we were drafting the legislation that created the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, the Motor Carrier Safety Improvement Act. And one of the stakeholders that I was working with at the time, Senator Breaux was one of my ranking members, was Kathy in her former role as the leader of the Trucking Association in Louisiana. And so you also have come full circle. And, you know, this organization that was birthed in 1999 to now leading at the FMCSA. So we're so grateful to have you here, and thank you and your staff for all their support.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's so nice to be here. Yes, Debbie and I have known each other for many, many years, and we all both have come full circle. I say that I grew up in law enforcement and witnessed the evolution of the trucking industry from economic regulation to safety regulation, and now we're launching into the next frontier of technology. And yes, we all both started at 12, you know. So thank you so much for inviting me to speak. I was going to come here anyway. In my previous capacity in Louisiana, I was participating in the Road to Zero program. And now that I'm here in Washington, it just seemed natural that and a privilege to be able to participate on the national level. So today I'm with you to speak as the Deputy Administrator of the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration and to bring you this message. Traffic fatalities are preventable. At FMCSA, we have 1,100 men and women who partner with 12,000 law enforcement individuals that we support through the grant process and with the trucking industry. We work very, very hard every day to prevent crashes and hopefully create a crash-free roadways, and because safety is our #1 priority. We can point to certain successes that we've had in the partnership and collaboration with the industry. For one is that the seatbelt usage among commercial motor vehicle drivers has increased from 65% in 2007 to 86%, and we think that is a significant achievement. And how do we conduct our vision? How do we accomplish this? At FMCSA, we actively engage with our partners and stakeholders. Our work includes holding motor carriers accountable, ensuring reliable vehicles, promoting knowledgeable and healthy drivers, and now we are encouraging innovation to unleash sound technology to advance highway safety. Safety is priority #1, no doubt, but it's a goal we cannot reach alone. Everyone owns safety, all of us, be it FMCSA, the motoring public, commercial drivers, all of us own safety. And it's in that vein, it's important to note that we have an increased focus on providing outreach and education and engagement with the transportation industry and the public through collaboration and partnership. Our 3 goals that I tell the staff is outreach, outreach, outreach. We're not only here to listen, to speak, we're here to listen and learn. You learn a lot more by listening than you do by talking to people. One example of one of the programs that utilizes this partnership approach is Our Roads, Our Safety campaign. This campaign encourages drivers, cyclists, and pedestrians to share the roads safely. In my previous capacity, sharing the roads safely, that campaign has been with us for many, many years, and it's simple and it just makes sense. Share the road safely. So the future of transportation, I mentioned previously that we encourage technological innovation. That's the next frontier of safety, as I said, of transportation. that holds the potential of saving thousands of lives while also improving productivity and efficiency. We are actively helping in the discussions by undertaking a wide range of initiatives and activities. We recently issued a request for comments on AV technology or automated driving systems, and where we're looking at the regulations that we have in place now, what may pose barriers to safely test and deploy, but at no way is safety ever at risk. It's got to be. We know the technology is coming, and it's coming fast. It's probably coming faster than some of us anticipated. So we're actively involved in engaging the commercial motor carrier community through outreach and activities. We're visiting with industry, safety advocates, driver organizations, and the motoring public on the potential impact of the ADS, or automated driving systems. We've had a very successful ADS public listening session in Ann Arbor, Michigan, a couple weeks back, and we'll have another in San Francisco in a couple of weeks. So we're excited about what we can learn about AV technology from all of these individual groups as we go forward. As the demand for freight grows and more trucks and buses are sharing our highways with the traveling public, our push to drive fatality numbers to zero is complex and is a challenge. However, we do not think it's impossible. We seek to achieve that. We do think it's possible. So I leave you with, we each have roles to play in this vision to make it a reality, and we look forward to working with all of you. Thank you very much.
Thanks for being here. Kathy, thank you so much. And now we have our third speaker from our government agencies, and we've been so fortunate to have great support from the Department of Transportation. Derek Kahn serves as the Undersecretary for Transportation. He's the principal advisor to the Secretary when it comes to transportation policy. Prior to coming to DOT, Derek served as general manager of Lyft in Southern California, and he's also been on the Amtrak board since 2015. But more than anything, one thing that I would want to share with you is that Derek is an engine. When you want to get things done, you want to focus on new ideas and innovation at DOT, I would say Derek's the first person that I want to talk to. He's been a fantastic partner, and I'm really excited for what he's going to share with the group today. And I see some of the folks who are out in the audience that really are focused in the data space, and I think Derek is one of the leaders in that area, and we are looking forward to having the coalition be involved and support the DOT. Derek?
Thanks, Bob, for hosting this. Bob and I had the privilege of being testifying before Congress on the same day, and so the fact that we're both here and confirmed means we didn't screw up too much. So thank you for hosting us, and thank you, Debbie, for that warm introduction. This is a very important meeting, and I'm glad that you meet quarterly to discuss these issues. We at the Department of Transportation appreciate all that the Road to Zero Coalition has done to take a fresh look at the major problem of traffic fatalities and really develop a vision document laying out a scenario for achieving the bold yet achievable goal of ending roadway deaths by 2050. I really would like to thank my friend Debbie and the NSC, the National Safety Council, for bringing together this diverse coalition of more than 600 member organizations. And through these key programs, the National Safety Council and all the folks in this room do important work to call attention to safety issues and really educate us, the policymakers, on options for action. In particular, earlier this year, the National Safety Council presented at the TRB annual meeting, the Transportation Research Board, on behalf of this coalition. And in it, Debbie actually used slides that depicted areas around the country that are accessible by ground or air ambulance within an hour. and laid out this concept of the golden hour, that if you're within an hour of a trauma center, your chances of surviving a serious accident grow significantly. And this data was visualized, and these types of visualizations are extremely helpful to policymakers, to state and local leaders, because it helps us digest the disparities we see in accident data based on geography. We also are deeply grateful for the National Safety Council working with DOT to distribute Safe System Innovation Grants, which fund innovative programs aimed at reducing roadway fatalities. At the U.S. Department of Transportation, safety is our #1 priority. I want to talk to you today about a project we've launched that will lay the bedrock for a safer transportation system in the future by making better use of data and data analytics. If you think about it, all of us in this room have a cell phone in our pocket. To give you a sense, this phone has as much processing power that NASA had when we sent a man to the moon in the late 60s. To think that in this room we have hundreds of these computers in our pocket that are able to track real time everything that we do, the number of steps we take. Some of us even have smartphones on our watches that track our heart rates. We're at such an interesting time in our nation's history in technology, and we at the department want to advance this in pursuit of safety. At the department, we have almost 800 data sets of specific transportation issues, things like the FARS data, the Fatal Accident Reporting System, or data sets on roadway conditions. But we're also not fully leveraging this information to improve safety. A lot of this data is siloed. It comes in at different tempos, and the various data sources are analyzed separately. Many are only published annually, and many have been collected and organized in the same ways for years, if not decades. Recent innovations in data science provide us with the opportunity to do so much more, and we've all seen the growth of big data sources, which can provide high volume of anonymous data that's nearly real time, that includes information about roadway conditions and other factors relevant to risk. Innovations such as advanced data analytics and machine learning are helpful and pull valuable information out of these data streams. And many of these innovations are being developed by cutting-edge tech firms and universities, and we believe these private sector partners should be part of the Road to Zero movement. These developments give us the potential to understand safety risk at the system level and to develop tools to discover new insights that will lead to life-saving strategies that address injuries and fatalities on our roadways. At the U.S. Department of Transportation, we're working on the Safety Data Initiative to improve the way we use data to inform policy and decision-making. This multimodal initiative is focused on modernizing our data analysis and integrating traditional data sets with new big data sources to gain insights into roadway safety. And through it, we're focusing on 3 things. 1, compelling visualizations. 2, the integration of these data sets. And 3, introducing advanced analytic techniques to identify risk patterns and develop insights that anticipate and mitigate safety risk to reduce injuries and fatalities. As part of this challenge, we initiated a FARS data visualization project to experiment with new ways of presenting NHTSA's Fatality Analysis Reporting System data. Traditionally, these data sets have been reported in tabular methods on an annual basis, usually 2 years after accidents occur. But NHTSA has been developing an interactive visualization of its 2016 traffic fact sheets speeding data. And visualizations like this can provide insights by presenting data in a more interactive way, which may be helpful to policymakers and the public. As a first step in involving our partners in this initiative, we've launched a data visualization challenge, the Solving for Safety Visualization Challenge. This will be a national competition for surface transportation safety insight. We're asking participants to come up with innovative ways to visualize data that will reveal insights into serious crashes in our transportation system. This challenge is open to individuals and teams from the business and research communities, including but not limited to tech companies, analytics firms, transportation carriers, industry associations, research and academic institutions, and mapping and visualization providers. We hope that this challenge will act as a catalyst for advancing data analytics within the department, as well as an opportunity to showcase the good work of others in visualizing traffic safety. I urge everybody in this room to participate in this challenge, either as a solver who competes in the challenge or as an innovation agent who will provide real-world knowledge, guidance, insight, issues, and data to solvers, especially those new to the transportation safety space. Solvers will compete in a 3-stage competition. During the initial ideation stage, solvers will submit a brief application summarizing the idea by July 31st. Selected solvers will advance to the concept and tool stages, where they will compete for a part of a $350,000 prize purse. US DOT staff are here with flyers, and these flyers are in the back, and they can answer any questions. You can also find details on our website at dot.gov or transportation.gov/solve for safety. Advanced data analytics are at the foundation of a systematic approach to safety in which we can effectively identify patterns of risk, track changes and emerging trends, and address the most significant safety risks. Access to timely, comprehensive information will transform our ability to help state and local partners continually improve operations and ultimately prevent future incidents. This is the model that the U.S. airline industry, in its cooperation with the FAA, has used in the successful drive to create a safer aviation system. By using sophisticated data analysis to identify and mitigate risk, commercial aviation is experiencing one of its safest decades since the start of human flight. US DOT's surface transportation modes are seeking to learn from this success and to address surface transportation fatalities and serious injuries. And we've already begun to see several municipalities and states across the United States working diligently to improve traffic safety through targeted, data-driven approaches. As you all probably know, in both New York and San Francisco, traffic fatalities fell to the lowest levels in recorded history in 2017, due in part to their dedication to the Vision Zero approach and the structural safety changes they have made through this framework. The National Safety Council has also done some great work in this area, using safety to identify the distance to a trauma center, the golden rule that has been used by many states across the country. These insights are valuable and can be used to help municipalities and states not only design safer roads, but also determine how to deploy effective safety countermeasures. Working together, we can use vast data resources to advance insight-driven policy to increase the safety of our roadways. At the department, we've launched several pilot projects to learn about data integration. The pilots are combining federal and state government databases with new private sector data sets to build predictive models. First, the Waze pilot project is integrating crowdsourced traffic data from Waze with crash data provided by states that implement NHTSA's Electronic Data Transfer, or EDT pilot. EDT is a system that allows US DOT to receive crash data electronically and securely from state systems in a matter of days. We're applying machine learning techniques to investigate whether Waze events can serve as a reliable, timely indicator of reportable traffic crashes for states that have not yet implemented EDT. Another pilot project is the Rural Speed Pilot Project, which examines prevailing operating speeds across multiple states to see how speed and really speed differentials interact with roadway characteristics to influence the likelihood of crashes. Rural driving only makes up 19% of traffic, but 50% of roadway fatalities in America. We are using anonymized data from GPS-enabled devices that provide prevailing speeds at 5-minute intervals across the entire national highway system, and we're integrating this powerful data with traditional data sets that provide posted speeds and roadway design elements. We believe that combining these will help us better understand what rural America faces when we see such a huge spike in fatal accidents in those neighborhoods. Third, the pedestrian fatalities pilot project, which Bob actually was talking about pedestrian fatalities just a few minutes ago. This pilot project seeks to integrate several sources of data to understand the effects of roadways and built environment characteristics on pedestrian fatality risks. Lessons learned from this pilot may be used to understand place-specific risks and inform data-driven policy. These are just some of the pilot projects that will help us achieve our goal of creating nimble, dynamic, data analytical tools to explore safety risk interactions. And this work will eventually support the emerging data-rich environment forming with the advent and adoption of vehicle automation. It's no surprise that we've been somewhat slow to adopt new technologies, but we believe this three-step approach of visualization, integration, and advanced data analytics will advance our capabilities. Visualization itself can capture the imagination of policymakers and display valuable content in a form that makes sense to stakeholders. And we want public and private stakeholders to take advantage of the big data era to enhance insights and improve the effectiveness of policies and decision-making. It's an honor to be here with you today, and I appreciate you taking the time to hear more about U.S. DOT's vision for using data analytics to advance transportation safety. And we at the department look forward to continuing the work with the Road to Zero Coalition to make progress toward our shared goal of saving lives. Thank you very much.
Great. If you wanted to see, we'll just check. So, and Kathy, I don't know if you have a few minutes. We were going to take about 5 or 10 minutes to make available Q&A opportunity. You have these amazing assets here to be able, if you've got questions about the data challenge that Derek's laid out or any of the work that the NTSB is working on. And if you have time to stay, Kathy, you can come back up. FMCSA's priorities. This is an opportunity for the coalition members to ask some questions. If you'd please identify yourself and your organization before you ask your question.
Hello, my name is Randy Cole. I'm from the City of Alexandria Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee. And just for background, our city just recently adopted a Vision Zero program. One of our homework assignments was to look at our data, primarily the crash data that we had in our police department that obviously gets reported to the state and national levels. And to be honest, it was kind of messy. A lot of data missing in there. Also issues with thresholds, reporting thresholds. When we try to go to zero, sometimes maybe something that a collision between a pedestrian and a car just results in an embarrassed pedestrian thinking it's not worth reporting. They call the police department in some state or something like this, and the police says, oh, you know, it's because you weren't really injured and didn't meet the $1,500 threshold for reporting, we won't report it. So how do we answer the great initiatives for big data when we have problems like that in the cities?
Really appreciate the question. What you're experiencing, what I think the City of Alexandria, you said City of Alexandria is going through is a fairly common experience, and the Safety Data Initiative is really surfacing that. And a lot of cities realize the opportunity and the potential and sort of the vision of Road to Zero, but the how to get there is difficult. And I think the what we want to get to is clear, zero roadway fatalities, but the how is difficult. And we hope that this initiative, bringing groups like this together to exchange best practices, is an important first step. And I think folks oftentimes, cities and states oftentimes get frustrated because they realize there are so many needs. You need technical needs, you need to find the right talent, you need to collect the data correctly, you need to analyze it, and then there's a bunch of technology terms, a data dictionary, a data warehouse, basically data anything, and people pull their hair out. And what we're realizing through the Safety Data Initiative is you can start with baby steps and move very far. For instance, half the people in this room have iPhones. On iPhones, there's an app called, I think, Heart or Health. If you click on it, it shows how many steps you took today. What Apple's found, and I think there's an article about this, if you use that app, people who open up that app actually change their way of life because they know there's a report for it. And so one of the important lessons we're seeing even early on is small incremental improvements could have massive benefits. And the NTSB is a great model of this. They put out a report. There's not 100% adoption of any countermeasure they talk about, maybe somewhere between a 50 and 90% adoption, but even a 10% adoption has massive impact. And so we're hoping through the Safety Data Initiative, through partnering with folks in this room, we can start collecting things like best practices. You know, we don't need to solve all of these things, but if we could just help a city start collecting pedestrian and bicycle accident data a little better, just even a little better, you actually begin to reduce the variance and increase the statistical significance of predictive models. And I think that's a very reasonable goal to see in the next couple years. And as states start seeing the value of it, you create a very strong positive feedback loop. So we're looking forward to it, happy to sit down and have our staff work with the City of Alexandria to talk about some of the early things we're seeing, because not every city will have tons of resources to apply. But there's actually a lot of small things folks can start doing, such as collecting data better and encouraging all of the stakeholders, not just their city or state's Department of Transportation, but their law enforcement, to start collecting data better and show the benefit and the value of that data, particularly through visualization, and it starts creating this positive feedback loop.
Thanks so much to everybody. I'm Dan Winston with Sfara, one of those tech startups people were mentioning. Question that was looming in the back of my mind is privacy. I feel like some people might be just kind of scared by this general concept, although I haven't heard anything that specifically that makes me scared. I just feel like people are leery of data and tracking, especially when the government's involved, even if it's for safety. How are you guys all thinking about that?
All of the pilot projects we've launched at the department will anonymize data. And I think that's at least the first step in this. We don't intend to capture any specific individual's travel patterns, but really looking at things at a system level. I think it's a very real and serious concern that that inhibits transportation planners collecting more data. And I think the public has a right to be wary. And so we at the department are making sure all of the data is anonymized. We have no individual data for any of these projects.
I see Susan's got Dave back there.
Good afternoon. Dave Snyder, Property Casualty Insurers Association of America. I want to thank you, Debbie, the entire coalition, and thanks to our speakers for your leadership. A question for NTSB. What are your next steps with regard to autonomous vehicles and potential safety standards relating to them? And then to both NTSB and FMCSA, what do you think are the priorities in terms of helping us reach our zero target of fatalities? Thank you.
Well, thanks. Let me address your second question first. What are the priorities and for the NTSB? And we think that those issues on our most wanted list are the ones that we feel can give us the largest potential for a safety payback. So that would be our priorities, and that's why we have placed them on our most wanted list. Regarding autonomous vehicles, I realize there is a lot of interest in that, and the fact of the matter is the NTSB is not the regulator. We are an accident investigation agency, and the knowledge that we gain is coming primarily from crash investigations. And so we have a number of crashes that we are investigating now that involve some form of autonomy in roadway vehicles. And so we made a number of recommendations coming out of a Tesla vehicle crash in Williston, Florida. If those recommendations were implemented, that would chisel away at it, like Derek was saying. It would make an incremental improvement in safety. But as far as the big picture, most of our knowledge is coming from crash investigations. The regulator is the one, and the industry are the ones that really need to be working on that particular issue.
Robert, maybe to share with folks who may not be as familiar with the most wanted list, they can find the full list on your website at NTSB, but in particular on road safety issues. Is there maybe one or two that you'd like to call out on your most wanted that affect road safety?
Well, it's a good question, and your predecessor on the board, Mark Rosenker, would remind me that all of our children are important. We're not going to decide which child is the most important. That's why I only had one child. But But so 7 of the 10 issues on the most wanted list do relate specifically to roadway safety. Granted, they may relate to other modes as well. Fatigue, for example, is multimodal. But those 7 issues on the most wanted list are the ones that could most significantly impact in a positive way roadway safety. Thank you, Debbie.
And so some of those fall into the double down on what works, like occupant protection, but also some of them may focus on technology as well.
Well, that's exactly right.
Yep. So ntsb.gov, and you can see the most wanted list there. It's a great resource, and those fact sheets are very helpful. I am looking out in the audience, and I do see Dia Gaynor of NASEMSO. And so, Derek, I have to give credit where credit is due. The National Association of EMS, the state officials that lead some of that trauma work, that really is the basis. Dia's on our steering group at Road to Zero. And so when we look at that golden hour, it's organizations like hers that are working so hard to elevate that issue. Kathy, I know Dave asked what FMCSA might be doing in this space.
Actually, we pride ourselves on being an agency that bases its initiatives on its data-driven initiatives. And just this morning, we spent over an hour analyzing new data that's just come in from the 2015, 2016. So we base our future initiatives on where we can get the biggest impact or where we think we need to direct our resources, be it the driver, be it the vehicle, be it the motor carrier. And so we also regulate buses. So our focus is using the data that we get to apply and direct our resources in a proactive way. And I can assure you that when we're talking about outreach, it's more, we have been incredibly focused on reaching out to the industry and identifying the stakeholders, not only the law enforcement agencies that help us accomplish our mission, but partnering with the industry. As Debbie said, we helped create. I remember when we created FMCSA and how we did that and why we did that. And I think we need to go back to that partnership and work with the industry. Everything we do doesn't have to be punitive. We can partner together to accomplish these goals, and we're getting a tremendous amount of positive feedback from that initiative. But we have to use the data to direct our resources where the biggest return.
And just to be respectful of our panelists' time, I think we'll just take one last question.
Thank you all for being here today. My name is Heather Zucchero. I'm with the National Complete Streets Coalition. And Derek, my question is for you. You spoke about the power of smartphones and this era of big data to gather better information about how people are moving on the streets to help us better understand trends in injuries and deaths on our roadways. Specifically, you mentioned Waze, and increasingly, I know we're seeing cities enter into data sharing agreements with ride sharing companies like Uber and Lyft, as well as with dockless bike share companies. But in the midst of all this, pedestrian fatalities especially are rising in recent years. So I was curious if you see any similar opportunities to harness the power of smartphones to collect better data on how people are moving around or being hurt and killed while walking on our roadways.
We certainly see potential for data. I think first principles are always helpful when you think of a very difficult problem like how do you reduce traffic fatalities. First principles with data is more data is usually better. Almost always more data is better. And so we think that no matter where the data set comes from, it is a positive. However, there are concerns around privacy and also around competitive business information that companies don't want to share and individuals don't want to share. And so it's a very difficult time in terms of, mandating or requiring folks to share data. That's sort of not the approach. We think there's a significant public good here, and we're seeing around the country transit organizations and cities start sharing more data that they collect. And that's the spirit of the department, that we post all 800 of these data sets, and I think we only have a small handful that are not shared widely, but 800 are open sourced. Whether ride sharing or any dockless bike sharing company should share data, it's almost a decision for each of the entities to make, just like each of us choose whether we share data when an app is open or not. There's clearly benefits to it, but at the same time, individuals have a right to some reasonable expectation of their privacy. And so I wish there was an easier answer here, because it quickly gets very complicated. So what we do is we take the data sets that frankly are the most well-known and the most comprehensive, like the fatality accident reporting system, which is when there's a fatal accident, and it's the most widely cited statistic in transportation, the number of people killed every year on the roadways, and start from there, because it's sort of the most full, comprehensive data set we have, and we can mirror that with things like Waze and others.
Thank you so much to our panelists, and certainly pedestrian fatalities, I think, is in everyone's radar given the rising numbers, seeing that year-over-year increase in the 10% range for pedestrians, and so excited about the Vulnerable Road User Report coming out. I know you all always are looking at the data that you can use to help us make better decisions. And we do have some grants through the Road to Zero program that are focused on the pedestrian issue just because of the numbers that are out there. Thank you all so much for your public service. Thank you for your leadership, and thank you for being here with the coalition today. Thank you. Thanks. Robert, thank you. And we are going to switch out our panels right now. So I'm going to invite the second panel to come up. We're going to be focusing on learning lessons from the global to the local perspective. And I know Mark, welcome to the Road to Zero Coalition. I would like to recognize Mark, who's going to be moderating this next panel. He's the program manager. Welcome. I'm not sure if you all can see the seats where you're sitting. Mark is the program manager of the Global Road Safety Facility and a senior transport specialist at the World Bank's Transportation and Digital Development Global Practice here in Washington, D.C. Since 2006, Mark has helped lead the bank's programs for safe road mobility and sustainable transport in low and middle income countries. He was a lead author on Transport for Health in 2014 by the World Bank and Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation. This was the first attempt to quantify the global burden of disease from motorized road transport. He's going to lead our panel discussion today, and we're going to hear from a couple of recipients from our Road to Zero grant program, and we're going to hear from the Ray. They're doing some awesome things, and so look forward to the discussion this afternoon. Mark, I am going to turn it over to you. Thank you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here today, and also a pleasure to see some familiar faces that I intersperse with in the international road safety scene. But I am the kind of rare, still kind of youngish American at the World Bank working on road safety, and it's been a pleasure to spend a large majority of my career working on international road safety, but I've always kept an eye here in the USA. I'm from Ohio originally, Cincinnati, Ohio, and blissfully unaware, spending my youth after getting my license at 16, going very fast on the kind of flat areas outside of Cincinnati. Those of you who've been to Cincinnati know it's a bit of a hilly area, but there is plenty of room around the Midwest to speed, and I did take advantage of that in my ignorant youth. And as I got through to doing my international career and recognizing, and I think any of us who have been abroad recognize one of the first things you see in developing countries is the transportation system and the roadways are perhaps not where they should be, not anywhere close where they should be. And so I found myself doing the bulk of my career looking at this subject, and just want to see the slide. There we go. And in fact, shortly before I joined the World Bank, the 2004 World Report on Road Traffic Injury Prevention by the World Bank and World Health Organization, WHO, was issued. Now, this was a bit of a seminal piece. It really was kicking off what I call the modern era of road safety, which also saw in 2004 the first UN resolutions on road safety, the first World Health Assembly resolutions. And I know, of course, this coalition has had a number of international speakers come and talk about what's happening internationally. But it was really this piece of work, along with the initial UN resolutions, which kickstarted the international road safety movement. And that led, of course, to the first Global Ministerial Conference in 2009, the next year in 2010, the UN resolution for a decade of action in road safety, and the launch of the decade in 2011. And finally, we find ourselves much into the Sustainable Development Goals launched in 2015, which of course has a road safety target. Now, I'm very pleased and really enjoyed reading the Road to Zero report that has been produced recently. I think it's an excellent piece on solutions and policies, suggesting areas in technology, in strategy, at the federal and state level in a number of sectors. And my hope is that it really carries the momentum forward to bringing in additional attention, hopefully as well additional resources, because I think grants programs are an absolutely instrumental way to demonstrate the efficacy of doing good work in all the sectors of road safety. But what we found was we had to be very strategic. So right in 2005, 2006, we launched something called the Global Road Safety Facility. And it is a grant-making organization housed inside the World Bank, or hosted by the World Bank, rather. And we're approaching right about $60 million in committed funds to us. But like all small funding programs, and that is relatively small, of course, compared to the absolute needs of road safety everywhere, the question is, how do we demonstrate good works with that small amount of grant financing, and how do we effectively leverage additional money with it and draw additional political attention in? And so actually, those of you familiar with the Tony Bliss and Gene Breen, who are kind of well-known international actors in road safety, this is their safe system pyramid. And essentially, road safety is produced like any other goods or service, and that is the building block. The institutional management functions at the beginning. I think all of you who are in Road to Zero have been exposed to this at one point. The interventions in the middle, and the ultimately trying to get to the results. But in developing countries in particular, and I would also go so far as to guess in the United States, it's that focus on interventions, which is the predominant area that we find. And in the developing world, unfortunately, that focus on interventions often leads to a complete forgetting of the fundamental building blocks of the institutions that we take for granted here in the USA or in Sweden or the Netherlands or Australia. And a lot of our work is on capacity building at the institutional level, on legislation, on coordination, on promotion, on data gathering. And so when we effectively find ourselves getting in conversations about how to manage road safety, manage outcomes in road safety, we find ourselves in a better position to use our grant financing to get those interventions better prepared and better used, and then ultimately get better results. And while road safety isn't rocket science, while we hear it is easily done, in fact, it is complex. And I think we need to get away from the message, particularly in the developing world, and perhaps in some states here in the USA, that road safety is a simple thing to do. We've invested quite strongly, as I say, at the institutional level in many developing countries. But we've also worked with partners and invested in particular interventions which we find are going to draw political attention or build on additional research, et cetera, et cetera. So some of you are familiar with Global NCAP, the Global New Car Assessment Program, which is doing fantastic work at star rating vehicles that are either produced or imported to developing economies and really exposing the lack of safety features of them. Of course, majority of you are probably familiar with the RAP programs, and we support very strongly, for example, the International Road Assessment Programs, who are also star rating and really usually using that visualization aspect for policymakers to find where the roads need interventions in developing economies. We've helped support the development of the Global Alliance of NGOs for Road Safety. This is a rather recent development in the international community, and I see Rochelle here from ASSERT, who of course lost her son on the roads in Turkey. And this is going to be and has already been a vital international cog at raising awareness at the grassroots level in developing economies. So we have the first time some type of international coordination mechanism. We've also spent a great deal of time trying to stop the notion by developing economy politicians at the state and local level or the federal equivalent level that education is the panacea for road safety. And I think we can still find that in many cases in the United States, but we're finding that, you know, we're making progress. Doing education in the United States or in an economy like Sweden or elsewhere is an entirely different proposition, where education can be effective in certain ways and if applied in with certain scientific principles behind it. But in the developing world, education is often used as the excuse for not taking action and the core principles that we know that we need for road safety. Good data collection, better infrastructure, better vehicle safety, and stronger enforcement. And I would say, just as a rule generally, enforcement is one of the areas in the international road safety community that has absolutely not been attended to the way it should be. And I spoke at the International Association of Chief of Police Conference in Philadelphia last year. I know they're very interested in looking at the international community, but of course, as much as we can in the United States to support stronger law enforcement and speed enforcement, I hope this coalition is able to do that because it obviously is incredibly effective. But we have not gotten there in either our grants programs or in terms of working with politicians effectively in developing economies. So again, that government capacity building is absolutely critical to us. I think there's really a few kind of areas that we focus on grants. One, innovation, yes. Obviously in the developing world, we need some basics on road safety. Many economies don't even have the basic engineering skills that they need to do the roadways effectively. But the most important thing that we try to build in is sustainability. Our grants are leveraging investment in countries through the World Bank and others. And our probably distribution, about $45 million so far in funding, has leveraged and or directly generated well over $1 billion in road safety investment so far. And that's with, again, a relatively small amount of grant financing. So I do hope this grants program grows here, but one can be very effective, even with small amounts of grant funding, to leveraging bigger things. And again, we're able to demonstrate that, at least inside my organization, in the 10 years that the Global Road Safety Facility as a grant-making body was established. Road safety lending increased about 240%. And we played a big role in that, but there was also just the general awareness raising around the Decade of Action for road safety, of course. But it's just incredibly effective when our teams in the field can have some additional financing, grant financing, to help shape politicians' opinion about how road safety can be done and how it can be effective, both for saving lives and for their own regimes. What's happening next? Again, you might have heard this already from speakers that came at earlier meetings. We need to move the 2020 target to 2030. We're not going to meet the global reduction target of reducing fatalities in half by 2020. So over the next few years, because we're going to approach the next global ministerial meeting in 2020 in Sweden, we're going to be focusing the political momentum at the UN and other levels on getting that 2020 target moved to 2030 where it should have been originally. There is a new UN Road Safety Fund, which just launched 2 months ago at the UN. It's one of a number of international grant-making bodies out there, but I think it's very telling that the United Nations themselves now have a UN fund which we expect to grow to help out developing economies and UN organizations. And finally, for Vision Zero here in the United States, best of times, worst of times, and maybe just in time. Best of times, I see tremendous momentum here. It's really, as an American, it is really fantastic from my point of view, having, again, worked in the international field for most of my career, to see where we've gotten to, and I applaud everybody in this room and Debbie for your leadership. Absolutely fantastic. The worst of times, still too many fatalities, still too many times in communities and elsewhere that the same story happens time and time again, and we just, every single life is absolutely critical, and we need to do more if we can quickly, and I think we're trying. And maybe just in time. This coalition is growing. We're keeping the momentum up at the federal and state level, but this grants program, which the first results, I guess, are coming in with our results that we hear about today and elsewhere through the grants program. Again, I think it's absolutely fantastic. And with that, I'd like to segue into our wonderful panel today so we can hear about some of the results. And our first speakers are Allie Kelly and Harriet Langford from the Ray. Allie is a Georgia native who has worked in public policy for 16 years. In 2015, Allie helped found the Ray, which is the world's first regenerative highway project. The Ray is a living laboratory of 18 miles of working interstate, demonstrating, piloting, improving the technology and innovation that will shape transportation infrastructure in the future. And Harriet is the founder and president of the Ray and a trustee of the Ray C. Anderson Foundation, a Georgia-based private family foundation honoring the legacy of her father, the late Ray C. Anderson. Harriet's leadership skills, her servant spirit, and her passion for team sports led her to a natural transition into nonprofit leadership in 2011 when she assumed her current role with the Family Foundation. Allie and Harriet, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon. I'm going to share a quick story. We're really excited about the Ray that's happening in Georgia. And it's a cutting-edge technology gathering of all things that can really transform the transportation infrastructure for the future. And our number one goal here is to save lives. That's very important. I'm going to tell you a quick little story that got us to this point. Looking at this is a publicly accessible living laboratory and a proving ground for the transportation infrastructure of the future. And our main partners are our Georgia Department of Transportation and the U.S. Department of Transportation. So it's a special corridor to me, and I'm going to tell you why it is. My father, Ray Anderson, was the founder and CEO of Interface. He took his whole life savings in 1973 because he saw carpet tiles that he believed would absolutely transform industry. And it was really a cutting-edge time for him because this was a new product. So these carpet tiles were really a dirty business. If you think about it, looking at carpet tiles being manufactured, there's a high petroleum, water-intensive, and energy-intensive process. So at the time, my father had no idea what was going on and the damage that his actual company was doing to the environment. In 1994, he was asked to give a speech, and he was really struggling, and it was something that he was not really prepared to talk about, but a book landed on his desk, and it was The Ecology of Commerce, and he looked at this book, and he got to page 6, and he saw the death of birth. And it really was what we called an epiphany and a spear to his chest. He realized just what a plunderer of the earth he was with all the natural resources. Dirty business when you look at carpet tiles. So Ray challenged his company to really think about this and help him figure out how to become a restorative company. Nobody had ever done this. There was no manual for this. So Ray worked with people from around the world to lead him to become really the greenest industrialist of the century. What was great about Ray was he proved the business case. You can do well by doing good. He saved his company over $450 million. And what was also special about Ray was that he was very willing to go out into the world, talk to other large corporations. He worked with Coke, Walmart, Unilever, and others. And everything he had learned through his experience, he shared with others. So Ray was not selfish. He was very much a hero for the environment. He received 12 honorary doctorates. He was written a couple of books, and he was recognized globally for his leadership. In 2011, we lost our father to cancer. My sister and I were pleasantly surprised he left the majority of his wealth to a foundation with no directions, no instructions. We looked at each other and said, oh my gosh, how do you honor this man? He's done such great things. Well, the first thing I thought of was why not pick a really special section that was on our highway where Ray grew up in West Point, Georgia, and actually opened his first manufacturing company in LaGrange. And this is an 18-mile stretch of highway, which is what we call today the Ray. And I said, this has got to represent my father. Something has got to change. I had just put the greenest industrialist name on a dirty highway, and that was unacceptable. So what could we do to improve this? We looked at number one, how can you possibly be sustainable, much less restorative, if you have 40,000 deaths a year on our highway? That's totally unacceptable. Also, look at the carbon footprint. Think about just the emissions. Until we move to complete EV cars and get off of gasoline, we will always have a carbon issue to deal with. And also, look at waste. What kind of waste is happening on interstates? Have you ever thought about the right-of-way as an opportunity to really transform what's going on the interstate? And also turn a liability into an asset and leverage more value. So today, I'm very proud to say the Ray is rolling right along. We have been able to accomplish some really great things with our partners, looking at cutting-edge technology from around the world. Allie Kelly, our executive director, is going to share with you just what we have accomplished. Thank you.
We're so excited to be here with y'all today. We're members of the Road to Zero Coalition, and we really appreciate the leadership of Debbie and her staff. Thank you for the opportunity to talk about the Ray. As Harriet just described, we work very broadly in the transportation sector. We work in asphalt and road materials. We work on right-of-way and highway shoulder vegetation. We have work planned in the airspace as well with drones. But we're going to focus our discussion with you today about the Ray on our safety work. I do hope you'll visit the website to learn more about the other work that we're doing in the renewable energy space, all in the transportation sector. In terms of our safety work, one of the first technologies that we executed and demonstrated on the Ray with our state DOT is an automatic rollover tire safety station. Why we did this is because really inspired by Ray Anderson and his work at Interface. He never overlooked the low-hanging fruit. He never invested in the newest, brightest whiz-bang at the expense of the rational, reasonable change and improvement that he could make in the everyday process. And we feel like this fits the mold that Ray could appreciate of so right, so smart. A lot of users of our transportation system are overlooking the importance of tire maintenance and safe operation of all types of vehicles. It's also quite an environmental impact when your tires are not properly maintained, so we felt like this was an opportunity to get a win-win-win with a simple piece of technology that had never been demonstrated in the United States before. This is a UK technology. It's drive-through. You operate your vehicle at a speed of 10 miles per hour or less. It takes about 7 seconds to complete all of the data collection and the analyses. And this simple piece of equipment, which is ubiquitous, this could be deployed at freight depots, seaports, inland ports. It could be deployed at every single school bus depot. It could be deployed in cities like the District of Columbia or Atlanta, where you have mass transit buses with dozens of lives that hang in the balance of the tire maintenance of that single vehicle. So you drive through this equipment at a low rate of speed, and within 7 seconds, the equipment reports to you your tire pressure, your tire tread depth remaining, and with the expansion that the Ray made with Wheelwright to this piece of equipment last week, it also analyzes the sidewalls of the tires for damage of the sidewalls, and it also can read the US DOT number on the side of the tire, so it knows if the tires are too old to be in operation. It knows at what specified inflation the tires should be kept. So we can start to make specific recommendations to drivers of what issues they have with their tires in real time, real place. With our system, you drive up to a kiosk and you can get a paper ticket with the results. You can also get the results texted to your smartphone, or you can take a picture of the results as they're displayed on the screen. But again, this is one of those technologies that we haven't had yet in the United States. But on the Ray, we've worked with our Georgia DOT to permit this technology and to standardize it so that other DOTs can replicate it quickly. We like to say we don't build unicorns on the Ray. It's important for us that everything that we do, we accomplish in a way that is standardized within the framework that DOTs operate, so that anyone can copy off of our playbook. And in fact, we announced last week a strategic partnership with Colorado DOT, and one of their first moves in Colorado is to export from the Ray the Wheelwright Tire Safety Station. I hope that this is of interest to this group, because this is a piece of simple but important technology that can save lives, save gasoline, and have a measurable impact on the way that we operate our roads and our highways safely and more sustainably. On the Ray this year, we're working with our state DOT to deploy autonomous vehicle pilots and connected vehicle pilots. We're not ready to announce the technology partners that we'll be working with, but that'll be coming soon, so follow us at the Ray Highway on Twitter and Facebook. Our autonomous vehicle pilot will be infrastructure-based, so striping and signage. And our connected vehicle pilot will focus on the data stream generated by connected vehicles as more models come on the mass market with connected vehicle radios activated. Currently, it's all 2018 Cadillacs. Next year, we look forward to seeing Volvos and VWs that are connected. And then after that, Toyotas and Lexus beginning in 2020. A slide that we stole from our friends at Colorado DOT. You shouldn't make any inferences from this slide about the Ray, but this is just a great pictorial for those of you who aren't super familiar with the connected vehicle transformation that's coming to our roads. This is an opportunity for DOTs and other municipalities to deploy roadside units to capture car-to-car and car-to-truck communication. It's about 24 standard data points. The cars are basically reporting out about themselves, but also some of those data points are contextual in nature. So you can actually derive information about the road itself from the car-to-car and car-to-truck conversation. And when we deploy roadside units to capture these conversations between vehicles, we can drag that data into the traffic management systems that DOTs are operating. And we can incorporate that data with existing data sets from cameras, from sensors, from weather stations. And with machine learning over time, as the data sets grow, we can actually be predictive about dangerous situations that are occurring or can occur on the roadway system. So this is an important piece of work that the Ray is doing with Georgia DOT towards achieving a smart highway system on the Ray, where we can test autonomous vehicles in an operational high-speed environment. We have 11 million cars on the Ray right now. But also so that we can understand how connected vehicle data can be used in important ways to make our roads more efficient and safer. Last but not least, I want to share with you something totally unexpected at the Ray. We actually created some new technology. We, as a nonprofit foundation, own all the IP and hold all the patents. It's a smart road dot. We took the plastic reflector dots off of the road. We replaced the reflectors with tunable LED lights. We added a very simple sensor stack that includes a magnetometer, vibration sensor, temperature, humidity, also an optical sensor. We enabled our smart road dot to talk using a simple radio frequency communication system, and they're unwired for power. So they're solar powered with a backup battery system that ensures 24-hour operation for 2 to 3 days at a time. Our road dot can be installed in the existing methods that we install reflector strips or reflector dots right now, but the important thing is that this sensor stack and the communication capability of these smart road dots allows us to hear the whole conversation from the road in real time and real place. So while we begin to build data streams from connected vehicles that tell us a lot about the car and a little bit about the road, we can also receive data streams from the road itself that tell us everything about the road. These dots with the sensor stack can tell us when ice is forming, when fog or heavy rain is obscuring the lane lines and making it difficult for users to maintain a lane. They can tell us when someone is driving and drunk and weaving or driving and distracted because they're looking at their smartphone. These dots will enable the road to actually tell us when someone is driving erratically and dangerously. These dots can also tell you when you're following too closely. They can pulse in order to try to regulate speed on our roads and to reinforce speed limits. There's many other things that I could tell you about the functionality of this device, but I wanted to share with you that we're on a journey at the Ray to make our highways and interstates safer, and we're proud to be working in parallel and aligned with such a hardworking and auspicious group of advocates as yourself. And we look forward for ways in the future to advance technology in the transportation sector that can achieve all of our goals, most importantly, saving lives on our highways, interstates, and road system. With that, I'll just say thank you so much. Again, we're at theray.org, at the Ray Highway, hashtag Ride the Future, Ride the Ray, Drive the Future. Thank you.
Elliot Harrod, thank you so much. That was absolutely incredible. I know I have some questions for you guys, but we will be taking questions at the end of the session, and we will actually ensure we have enough time to get a reasonable amount of questions in. Let's go to our next speaker in the meantime. Emiko Atherton is director of the National Complete Street Coalition and Smart Growth America. Hope I got that correct. As the director, Emiko oversees the coalition's federal advocacy, communications, research, and technical assistance programs, and she has used her expertise in transportation policy, public health, land use, economic development, and legislation to consult with communities across the United States on how to create better transportation networks. Before joining the coalition, Emiko served as the chief of staff for a King County council member in Washington state. In that role, she worked closely with local and state governments, federal agencies, and Congress, and NPOs on policy development and implementation, coalition building, and transportation planning. Emiko, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the Road to Zero Coalition for having me speak today about a project that we couldn't do with all of you here in the room. As you heard, my name is Emiko Atherton, and I serve as the director of another coalition called the National Complete Streets Coalition, which has some members that I see here in the room today, such as AARP, other grantees of the Road to Zero Coalition, such as the Institute for Transportation Engineers, as well as groups like the National Association of Realtors, the American Public Health Association, and the American Heart Association. We are a group of organizations that are really committed to creating transportation networks that serve all users of all abilities. And what that really means is that we're going to create these transportation systems that, regardless of who you are or how you want or need to travel, you can get from your home or your origin to your destination, say it be work, your place of worship, medical appointment, to access healthy food, to socialize in a affordable, convenient, reliable way, but more than anything in a safe way. So we are about creating, again, these systems that are safe for all users. We were founded in 2005, and we've really worked to help communities across the country adopt Complete Streets policies, which are policies that say we are making a commitment to building really as the default transportation planning process for all users of all abilities, whether that be in funding, in scoping, in designing, in actually building, operating, and maintenance. I'm proud to say that this year we have seen the adoption of over 1,350 Complete Streets policies throughout the United States, the District of Columbia, and Puerto Rico. We're also starting to see Complete Streets policies develop in our neighbors to the north in Canada and as far as down into Mexico and Brazil. So it's really a system, it's a context-sensitive approach to planning. And I'm here, though, specifically to talk today about our Moonshot program, that was enabled by a Road to Zero innovation grant. We came up, when I first read the grant application, it was, what is your idea for really a moonshot program to move towards zero road fatalities? And although we work with all modes, we really focus on vulnerable users, and those in the United States happen to be bicycles and pedestrians, like many other countries across the world. And so we wanted to focus our technical assistance we wanted to focus our grant on working with those vulnerable users. And so we came up with this idea of what we call the Safe Streets Academy, that we would bring together and really create peer learning between 3 communities in the United States. They would also get some education via distance, and so they would learn from each other. They would learn from national experts in road design and safety. But they would actually have to go out and apply their moonshot projects. So we saw our moonshot then getting some launching off some other cities into possibly other orbits. And so we were really excited to get this. We launched this program about a year ago today. What I'm really going to focus on is the outcomes. So we spent about 9 months together as a cohort. There were 30 participants from each jurisdiction that we selected who met in each city. But they all had to focus, each module and each session and each kind of on-experience learning focused on building these demonstration projects, was that they were going to learn some proven safety countermeasures and then test them out in a temporary way in their communities, because these were communities that we'd say were on the edge. They were not leading the country, I think, in innovation, but they definitely weren't behind. They were just ready to take that leap and needed that extra kind of push to get them, the extra education, but also the extra courage and support. And so we wanted them to kind of test out and create a safe space for them to test out new ideas, to work with their elected officials on this, to work with their communities, to implement, again, proven safety countermeasures, but in a fast, flexible, and low-cost way. I mentioned this because it was this blending of kind of new ideas for getting transportation safety projects out there. Like you might hear the term tactical urbanism, going out and, I read an article about how a group in Omaha, Nebraska created a bike lane overnight with toilet plungers. So kind of blending the wild with things that we really know that work. So we really based our curriculum around FHWA's proven safety countermeasures, which I have here. I mentioned that we worked with 3 communities overall. We had a competitive application project and ended up selecting the cities of Orlando, the Lexington, Fayetteville Urban County Government of Kentucky, and the city of South Bend, Indiana. We got just a plethora of really well done applications. We conducted interviews with all of them, but we ended up selecting these because, again, not only we're in that sweet spot where we knew that with this technical assistance we could really shoot them off, but they all had similarities. They all had something to offer each other, not just to learn from us, but to learn from themselves. So some said, we're really good at community engagement. We want to teach the other communities how to do community engagement. Where another community might say, we're not that good at that, but we know how to fund these projects. We figured out how to work with our legislature or city council mayor to fund these projects. So we ended up picking these 3. Again, we met over the course of 9 months, and then they actually went out and built these projects. I encourage all of you to read the case studies from these demonstration projects. You can get them at www.smartgrowthamerica.org. But what I'm going to cover with my remaining time is some of the lessons that really the cohort learned from launching these demonstration projects. This here is a picture from South Bend, Indiana, where they really chose to focus on neighborhood traffic calming. Within the community of South Bend, a lot of the neighborhood streets are used as bypass streets for crowded arterials, so it's commuters often trying to shave a few minutes off their commute by speeding down streets where children's play, where there's parks, where there's schools. And so what they did is they decided, we're going to test out neighborhood traffic calming, which they really hadn't done in one particular neighborhood that had high speeds, And it also had a concentration of vulnerable users. It was a low-income community with a high percentage of people of color living there. And what they learned is that from them, it was that temporary demonstration projects are great opportunities to really test out new ideas, but to also teach the community about safer streets and to build trust with the community. For any of us who have ever worked in government, we know that we know we're not always the most trusted voice in the community. I used to go to community meetings as practically part of my job, and it was, and I know that, you know, that there was often a sense of distrust when we walked in the room, and we really wanted to build the skills of this cohort, not just to do these projects that were safer, but built the trust with the community so they accepted them into their streets and into their neighborhoods. So South Bend decided to do something they hadn't done before, which is actually to start to working and going into the community to ask them where they wanted to put their safety improvements. Instead of hosting community meetings, they went to events that were already taking place, like a neighborhood chili cook-off, and had them start to crowdsource where did the community think were the most dangerous spots within that area. They tested out different measures. I'll go back to the slide before, but you can see this was a traffic circle, and made sure they heard that education, really teaching people what they were doing, was equally important as just putting it in. So most people don't know. You know, we are a select group of people in this room that might know what a traffic circle, or even, you know, when I throw acronyms like FHWA or USDOT or anything that we say, I think we forget we live in a world and people encounter this on their streets and they don't know. So this was a simple, really low-cost measure that I think had paid dividends. But what they showed is we also had them, as part of their demonstration projects, take before and after data, because we wanted to make sure what they were implementing was actually working. We're still collecting that data, because although we required them to only do the project for a minimum of a weekend, the minimum project that they actually ended up having was a month. This project is still up and will probably stay. It was put up in April, and it will probably stay until the first snow in Indiana. And so you could see in all of the different tools that they tried, whether it was a traffic circle, a bump out, a chicane, or even a mini traffic circle, that speeding, the percentage of people driving 25 miles an hour or less before and after South Bend's project went down. And why this was so important is we really did stress, I think, that report that we heard from NTSB earlier, that speed kills. And that also as a driver, your periphery vision narrows the faster you go. And so we were trying to create safe streets, just not on major arterials, but also in communities. I love this picture was from, you can see this is an aerial picture from the most kind of the keystone traffic calming measure that they did at this confusing intersection. And they worked with the local artists to actually get the community engaged and design that project. In the upper right-hand corner is a city council member who actually worked with some children in the community to paint that. And the other thing they did is they created this whole library of different things. So they tried a chicane out in one area and a bump out in another, and introduce people to new tools. And so this was the first project, and if you're in the Michiana region anytime soon, I encourage you to go check this out. The second lesson learned was that you need thorough community engagement to build support for projects that improve safety, especially when these projects come with trade-offs for driving speeds. One of the other things the National Complete Streets Coalition does is use data, actually use USDOT data, the FARS data that we heard Derek mention, to put together a biannual report called Dangerous by Design that shows the most dangerous places to walk in the United States based on relative risk. And Florida is consistently the most dangerous place to walk in the United States. And Orlando is historically in the top 3 most dangerous cities in the United States. So we wanted to work with them as they have a new director of transportation that is energized and has been galvanized to try out these new safety projects. So they decided to do what we typically know as a road diet on a half-mile segment of road on somewhere called Curry Ford. This is a road that goes through a low-income community in the city of Orlando, but is also used as a bypass road for commuters coming from outside communities to downtown Orlando who do not want to pay on the adjacent toll road. And so what they wanted to do, it also has a high rate of pedestrian and bicycle crashes and frequent speeding So what they wanted to do was that road diet, so they converted a 4-lane road. I'll go back over to that. They created a center turning lane, and they added buffered bike lanes there. They also added a safe crossing where they added, it was connecting to kind of major retail destinations as well. The after results were that there were slower speeds and cars were yielding to pedestrians at the new mid-block crossing. People, when they talked to them, also felt safer in those bike lanes. They spent a lot of time going out and talking to the community. They had a big community day event right adjacent to the corridor. But what was interesting is that while they went out, they didn't, I think, they started to, they wished in retrospect they had actually worked more with some existing groups in the community, because what came back as their feedback from their before and after data was that, well, the majority of people who self-selected on the survey about whether they were happy about the road diet, most of them were not from the actual community. They were, again, those commuters who claimed that their commute was delayed by 30 minutes. When they got the data back, it was about 4. And so I think, again, it's that choice now that they've given to elected officials. Do you want to be somewhere with a 4-minute delay but no one is killed? Or do you want to be somewhere that is, again, going to prioritize the movement of people who don't even live in that community through vehicle traffic? So it's, again, that question of, do you want to be a through place or a to place? Do you want to be a drive to community or drive through community? The last project was in Lexington, Fayetteville. And their lesson learned was make the most of the resources at your disposal and let the community lead the way to create slower and safer streets. So the city, or the consolidated government of Lexington, Fayetteville, hasn't done a lot of kind of traditional community engagement, but they're really interested in, again, in testing out some of these new countermeasures. And so what they did is they picked a location based on crash data and on some road design, but then instead of going out and just deciding what to do there, they actually partnered up with with a group called the Citizens Environmental Academy, which is another peer learning cohort, to lead the door-to-door and peer-to-peer engagement. And the community actually defined what the safety issues were, as well as the solutions they wanted to see. What they ended up doing is coming up with they redesigned 2 confusing, dangerous intersections. They made them safer, more predictable. They added a protected crosswalk, refuge median, and bump outs. And what was great about it is when I went and visited it wasn't just making safer intersections, but again was connecting people to places. I was there. They put one of the crosswalks and protected medians right by Friday night market. That's really one of the kind of pinnacle events in the community where a lot of children and families walk there. And they previously had to cross this really high-speed, dangerous intersection. They would park at this church, and they'd have to run across. And then now there's this really kind of safe space for them to walk. And I went there and counted, and about every 30 seconds, there was a family walking through that in a safe way, and cars were slowing for that. I should say that all of these projects were done for a very minimal cost as part of our Road to Zero innovation grant. We subgranted them a small amount. If anyone's ever worked in kind of capital projects, we granted them $8,000, which gets you about a nail when you're building big projects. And then they matched those either in kind or some additional dollars. They also used kind of what they already had in their library. And I know Lexington and South Bend are looking at building kind of what they call demonstration project libraries or traffic calming libraries. So when they take these out, should they choose to, a lot of them are looking at moving them into more permanent projects, so they'll have to have more permanent infrastructure. The other communities can use these materials again to make kind of safer streets within their communities. I'm really excited that we were, again, recipients of another Road to Zero grant. Well, we'll be using some of these same principles, but integrating a lot more kind of smart cities technology with cities, and so we'll have applications open for that at the end of the month. Again, I wanted to thank the Road to Zero Coalition, who has been an amazing partner to work with, Susan in particular, and we could not do this without your support, so thank you.
Mika, thank you. Our last panelist today is Dr. Kathleen Klinich. Dr. Klinich is an associate research scientist in the University of Michigan Transportation Research, what does the I part stand for? Institute, thank you. just to confirm, Biosciences Group, and serves as an associate director of UMTRI. Dr. Klinich has 27 years of experience performing research on how to protect occupants in motor vehicle crashes, particularly child passengers. Her most recent research efforts have focused on improving compatibility between child restraints in vehicles, examining belt fit of child occupants, assessing the role of legislation on restraint use, and analysis of crash data to guide future safety efforts. Dr. Klinich?
Do I have to do something? Thank you for the opportunity to speak with everyone today. I'm here to talk about a tool we have developed at UMTRI called Utmost. It's a crash countermeasure visualization tool. It was conceived by my colleague, Dr. Carol Flanagan, who heads our data group at UMTRI. I consider myself the godmother of this project, that I helped, I came up with the acronym, so that was one of my roles, and have done some analysis to implement some of the countermeasures. I'd also like to acknowledge our colleagues, Jared Carlo, who's the chief programmer on this, and Jingwen Hu, who's helped with modeling to come up with some of the countermeasures. So Utmost stands for it's the Unified Theory for Mapping Opportunities in Safety Technologies. And the idea for Utmost, which Carol conceived of about 10 years ago, was to allow visualization of the benefits of multiple safety countermeasures and to understand how different combinations of safety measures might influence the crash population. So this tool is an online tool. It's available to the public, and you can find it at utmost.umtri.umich.edu. So we have the first incarnation. We started looking at the current distributions of crashes and injuries, and with our Road to Zero Innovation Grant last year, we added fatality module to the program. So what you can do with Utmost is explore what if we did different things to try and reduce crash injuries and fatalities. You can look at what happens if vehicles had advanced crash avoidance technologies. You can simulate what would happen if everybody was wearing their seatbelts. You can simulate what would happen if every state had strong graduated driver's licensing laws. And by playing around with these different types of countermeasures, you can evaluate different trade-offs between the safety benefits they might have and the implementation costs. So the data sets are all national automotive sampling system data sets that are collected by NHTSA. The distribution of the people that are in crashes is from the National GES system, and we also have a method for estimating the distribution of crash severity using GES, even though it's not specifically collected in that data set. For injury risk, we use NASH CDS to estimate the risk of injury in different types of crashes, frontal, side, rear impacts, and rollovers. For the fatality modules that we've added this year, we also use NASH CDS to generate kind of a baseline fatality risk and distribution of crash severity, but then we were able to make corrections on that based on the averaging the data from the last 5 years of FARs that were available. So for those of you who might care about this, the way that the program works when we do the math is kind of illustrated by this set of plots. So for each crash direction, frontal, near side, et cetera, we have a risk of AIS 3 or greater injury, which is illustrated by the top plot. Then we have the exposure. So how many, for this example, it's for near side crashes. So what's the distribution of people in near side crashes? So that as a function of the crash severity, so that's in that middle plot. So the solid blue line is what the crash distribution looks like now. If we were going to add some crash avoidance measures, some of those crashes wouldn't happen. So that dotted line graph is what we would expect the exposure to be. For example, if we implemented crash avoidance technology that reduced the frequency of near-side impacts. What we do to count the number of people in crashes who are injured is we multiply the injury risk curves times the exposure curves, which is shown on that bottom plot, and then we integrate underneath the curve that gives you the number of people who are injured in near-side impacts. So we can estimate the reduction in injury by multiplying by that alternate exposure dotted line curve, and that will give us the reduction we'd expect with a particular crash avoidance technology. And so what we do in this program is we got pretty much a giant spreadsheet with 100,000 row, And every combination of, we have driver age groups, we have alcohol, we have restraint, we have 25 different pre-crash conditions, we have 6 different crash types, and some other things. We do these calculations for every one of those rows really quick, and then make a plot to show you how that changes the count of people or injuries. We can also estimate the effect of technologies that reduce crash severity. So for example, on this plot, the red line would be a distribution of crashes that's current. And if you had a technology such as automatic emergency braking, you're going to we just essentially shift that whole curve to the left. So some of those crashes are not going to happen at all because the emergency braking made them not happen. And some of the rest of them we're expecting that the severity of the crash will be lower even if the crash could not be prevented. So the program accounts for technologies such as that that would reduce the severity of a crash. So when you start with the program, this is what the opening screen looks like. We have a plot of the distribution of crashes. This is the people involved in crashes. And we have 25 different types of pre-crash scenarios that we consider in here, because not all crash avoidance technologies are going to apply to all types of different pre-crashes. So we account for that in there by kind of flagging each row as to whether a technology would apply to it or not. And then up on the top left corner, we have a world configuration, which gives you choices of what to look at. And then that middle green bars is kind of a running tally of the current count of what you're looking at versus the adjusted count after you apply countermeasures. And then the bottom left is our countermeasure window. So when you're choosing configuring your crash world, you can choose to look at people in crashes, people injured in crashes, or people killed in crashes, which is the new module we've added with our NSC project. And then you can look at it different ways. You can look at by those 25 different crash types. You can look at it by frontals versus near sides rollovers. Type of vehicle, the age of the person, the age of the driver, the gender of the person, alcohol involvement, and light condition. And we know it's important to consider those different types of pre-crash conditions. One of the things we learned when we were doing the fatality module is that the types of crashes that occur generally have a different distribution than the types of crashes that involve fatalities. So if you look at this plot of kind of the distribution of crashes, the black lines are fatal crashes and the blue ones are general overall tow-away crashes, or crashes that are reported in GES. So you can see that big blue line is like the most common type of crash is a rear impact, which is the most common overall, but it actually doesn't contribute as great a percentage of fatal crashes. When you look at fatal crashes, the pre-crash conditions most likely to result in a fatality are road departure, pedestrian, opposite direction, and control loss. So we account for the different types of pre-crash conditions that can differ between general crashes and fatal crashes in the program. So when you apply countermeasures, you go over and say you want to add a countermeasure, and it gives you a drop-down list of different things that you can simulate the effect of. And I have here examples for lane departure warning and frontal collision warning. So for each countermeasure, there's kind of a little description of what it is briefly, and then what we estimate their effectiveness to be and what types of crashes it would apply to. So for lane departure warning, we estimate it to reduce 25% of head-on collisions and 25% of off-path crashes based on results from the literature. And then when you choose that countermeasure, the default value is set to 25%. But we have a slider bar there so you can estimate what would happen if that type of technology became more effective as it's deployed more and its technology advances. So I made a couple plots where we were exploring the effect of applying different countermeasures on fatalities. So this plot shows kind of the baseline conditions and adjusted conditions that if we took all vehicles and we equip them all with current crash avoidance technologies at their current level of effectiveness. We kind of did a 5-year running average to account for fluctuations in fatalities. But if we were able to equip all vehicles with these crash avoidance technologies, we'd probably reduce fatalities by about a third. And when you look at the specific technologies that have the biggest effect on the counts, the top 5 are electronic stability control, lane keeping assistance, lane centering, automatic emergency braking, and frontal collision warning. Another thing we looked at is getting rid of all the alcohol crashes, and you can simulate this by putting the effectiveness of an alcohol interlock device up to 100%. So that would also have a similar reduction in fatalities by reducing them by about 26%. And one of the options we have in there, there's different ways to account for restraint, but if we had everyone properly restrained, so all adults in 3-point belts and all kids in the recommended child restraints and all motorcyclists wearing helmets, we'd also see about a 27% reduction. And I think I'm an occupant protection background, and getting those last few, we're over 90% belt use, but getting those last 10% people belted will really have a substantial effect on reducing fatalities. When we put all these countermeasures active at once, accounting for that there's different interactions between the different types of countermeasures, we estimate that we would have a 61% reduction in fatalities from about 33,000 a year to about just under 13,000. The other thing that's interesting to look at is that right now we have frontal as the biggest fatality problem, followed by rollover. We had actually reduced the number of rollovers substantially, such that frontal and pedestrian would be the 2 largest contributors to the crash type resulting in fatalities, with about just under 4,000 each for some of those. So once you get to this point, you can do some different types of plotting. There's options to plot by vehicle type, driver age. So if you get to this point and you want to say who are those people and what are those types of fatal crashes that are in frontal and pedestrian, you can look at it in different ways to try and identify additional countermeasures that we have not thought of yet, or what would you have to do to improve current countermeasures to make those numbers go down further. The other thing you can do is look at subsets. So we can look at the number of injuries and crashes by the person's age. We have a rural, urban, suburban tab, looking at alcohol involvement, and I believe light conditions as well. So to summarize, we have a tool that is available for everyone to try at home called Utmost, which is utmost.umich.edu. It's an online tool that we can use to explore the effects of countermeasures on motor vehicle crashes, injuries, and fatalities. And we're excited that we have received a second year of funding. One of the things we want to look at is the socioeconomic factors related to motor vehicle crashes. As everyone gets more excited about automated vehicles, we have concerns that they may not be accessible to all people who travel. And looking at the current situation of motor vehicle crashes, we'll be able to add options to look at race, ethnicity, and income levels. And that will also improve our understanding as new technologies are introduced into the vehicle fleet. How long will it take for that to reach all of the population? So at this time, I'd like to thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Klinich. We now have Susan's 3:30, right? Great. Just under 25 minutes, and we'd like to start the Q&A from the audience. There are 2 microphones, which National Safety Council staff will be handling, and if you could ask, perhaps we take questions in batches of 3. So please come forward with questions. Yes.
Hi, my name is Joseph Kessler. I'm a summer intern at the U.S. Department of Transportation. My question is mainly geared to Mark. Perhaps you can all weigh in. Is there any consideration to grant funding to ensure that developing countries or any country builds transportation systems that around safer modes of transportation? So building transportation systems around interregional rail and making cities more walkable and bikeable will result in fewer traffic fatalities than transportation systems where everybody needs to drive. So is there any dollars from the World Bank that go into trying to reduce the dependency on driving?
Thank you. Take 2 more questions.
This is for Allie and Harriet. I saw the Ray is branching out and working with the Colorado Department of Transportation. What infrastructure is in place through the Ray to introduce this to the departments? I live in Delaware. We are small, but we have a couple of prime locations that would be worthwhile that I would be happy to pitch for you to both the Secretary of Transportation and the Office of Highway Safety.
Thank you so much. One more question, please. If not, I have a question for Nico. It was actually a question around the politicization of speed management. You talked about now, obviously globally, speed is an issue. Speed is an issue in the United States, like everywhere else. Do you find, or did you find in your project, or do you find generally that sort of a multifactorial suggestion to the local community about how to mitigate speed is needed versus one dominant message that might resonate around why mitigating speed is necessary for the community? So that maybe you could answer that question first, and then we'll take it backwards. We'll go to the question for the Ray, and then I'll answer the first question.
Thank you. That's a great question. I think that gets into, when we're talking about creating safer streets, and you hear the E's a lot. There's engineering, there's enforcement, there's education. I think there's things they're adding now, EMS, emergency services, equity. I think this gets around the education piece. If that's what you're talking about, kind of this you need a lot of strategies to reduce speed. Probably, from my perspective and the National Complete Streets perspective, reducing speed limits is probably the least effective way. Next to enforcement, kind of on our end, and some of the research that we've done where it really comes from the engineering and road design angle. I think it's explaining and getting to the education about why you're doing the different things that you're doing, and explaining explain why. Often we don't explain why we do what we do when it comes to transportation projects, and it's very frustrating to see something happening in your, in your own street or on your own commute, and you don't understand why that's happening and how it's helping. And then if we don't do the same to our elected officials, they get equally excited. I used to work for an elected official, and she would get really excited until, not always in a good way. She didn't understand the why. And then getting to the benefits, and I think explaining, and it's a hard thing because it's not, in a way, transportation is something we do every day and we don't actually understand a lot of. For instance, reducing speed doesn't actually always reduce capacity or volume. It might not even reduce your commute time, if you're speeding ahead and you get stopped at a lot of intersections. But I think education is a huge component of that, and not just we looked at, say, the click it or ticket and what an impact that had on people using seatbelts. I think if people understand, and then then it's up to them to make that kind of informed trade-off about do I understand I understand it, and then am I willing to accept that? But it also gets into, I think you have to be able to educate and then actually tell the story behind that. I think about in South Bend, Indiana, they actually did a project in their downtown called Smart Streets, where they converted 2 kind of large one-way streets going through their town into 2-way streets. They added wider sidewalks, really beautiful intersections. And people from the surrounding communities were, again, very worried it affected their commute times because they all drive through South Bend. What the city did is they did before and after data, and they actually worked with the news media to kind of do a drive-through before and a drive-through after, and actually the delay was about 2 minutes again, but the economic benefit to the downtown is in multi-million dollars in new property tax, new investments from real estate developers. When I first started visiting there a couple of years ago, there was one hotel, it was a DoubleTree, now there's 5 to choose to stay at. But it's telling that story as well, so not just kind of explain, but telling the story and the benefits along with it.
Thank you so much. Our colleagues from the Ray, the second question, please.
First of all, I want to say I appreciate the question because we love to talk about scaling. That's where you really start to reach the impact that we think is the potential of living laboratories like the Ray and RoadX. We've actually incorporated several different types of technologies that we would love to talk with you about in detail, but I'll just quickly review them. As mentioned, the Wheelwright Tire Safety Station, several DOTs are actually reviewing that technology for deployment through DOT operations. And then we're also having conversations with tolling authorities as well as bus transit systems. But DOTs can deploy them at way stations, snow tire stations, even district offices where DOT vehicles are housed and depoted. We were the first in the United States to deploy solar pavement. We have a stretch of pilot solar road in an access lane leading to the interstate. Because it was the first solar pavement in the United States, we didn't go straight to the interstate because we have 70 mile per hour speed limits where people typically will drive 80 to 90. And that wasn't smart for anyone to put the first solar road in that environment. So we went in an access lane where you see speeds of 30 to 40 miles per hour. Anyone who's interested in this, I have a section of it in my purse. I know that sounds so weird. I'm the solar pavement lady with the section of pavement in her bag. But it's a French technology. You don't have to change your existing road infrastructure. It adheres onto the existing road. It is more skid resistant than brand new asphalt or concrete pavement, so it's very safe. Enables the travel lane, which is largely a single-use asset, to multitask and produce more value and produce additional revenue streams. The company is going commercial at the end of the year with a bike path version as well as a crosswalk version for urban areas. And then, of course, the Ray is a suburban/exurban logistics corridor high-speed environment. So our next step would be to look at deploying the solar road called the Wattway on the shoulder of the interstate to see if we can get the shoulders to multitask. We're also breaking ground on a megawatt solar farm on the side of our highway. So on the side of Interstate 85, you'll have crash barrier, a 40-foot setback, an 8-foot chain link fence, and then a megawatt solar farm that will also be 100% pollinator friendly. So all native pollinator plants as the ground cover for about 3,000 solar panels. We're the third state to pilot what is otherwise known as right-of-way solar. This was begun 10 years ago by the state of Oregon, followed by Massachusetts, and now by Georgia. I enjoy saying that because Georgia doesn't normally follow the lead of Oregon and Mass, but we are here. So we would love to talk about that. The Ray's contribution to this right-of-way solar discussion is we're going to work with UT Austin's Energy Institute this year to look at every mile of interstate in the United States and evaluate the right-of-way of every mile for appropriateness for solar development. We're going to be looking at everything from stormwater retention to what's the distance of the right-of-way to transmission and distribution. Is the right-of-way wooded? Is it large enough to house solar or even wind resources? And then from those data sets using GIS modeling, NREL modeling, and others, we'll arrive at a solar capacity number that will have relevance to each state for all 50 states, from which we'll project revenue potential for each state DOT. Again, we're trying to get the single-use asset of the right-of-way to multitask and produce a revenue stream that's brand new for DOTs. So we can talk to you about that as well. Irradiance in Delaware is not what it is in Georgia, but it's still an important tool for DOTs to be evaluating for new sources of revenue. We plan to have the Smart Road Dot ready for initial deployments in about 12 months. We've gone through 2 prototype versions, and now it's time for us to break a couple hundred units in an engineering verification test before we put it out on the open road. So that's another opportunity with the DOT that we can talk about. Have I missed anything? We also have solar-powered EV charging. And that's an important point for all of us to think about as we move into an autonomous vehicle world, AVs or EVs. So the gaps in charging infrastructure outside of metro areas must be addressed quickly. And of course, we on the RAY promote solar-powered EV charging, and we can talk about some of the leading technologies that enable solar-powered EV charging in an urban environment. However, in a high-speed interstate environment, we need to use DC fast charging because people driving on the interstate need a quick option for charging in 15 or 20 minutes. So that would be something that we can talk to you about as well. We installed a DC fast charger, grid connected in order to enable the DC fast charging. It's a lot of power discharged very quickly, so you can't currently undergird a DC fast charging system with the battery technology and its limitations that we have at our disposal right now. So you got a grid connect, but you can still have the solar aspects as well. I think that covers it. We'll be adding more technology in the very near future, so stay tuned. But any of those technologies, we broke the egg on the RAY, and we're transparent about performance. We have created the warm relationships with the advanced technology companies and done it in a way that's standardized and permitted so that you can copy it all day long. We really need the kind of peer exchange and the coordination across regions, state to state, in order to scale these technologies that are ready for prime time and should be replicated across the country, coast to coast. Thank you.
Thanks so much. The first question on encouraging alternate modes of use, absolutely. Of course, the World Bank and many development banks are encouraging the client countries to, through our BRT projects, metro, rail, et cetera, particularly through our urban departments and, of course, transport departments. But I think what we need to understand is that the amount of kilometers of roadway that are going up in countries and states within countries every day is astronomical. Building a roadway, of course, if it's an all-weather road, you have the case for a good economic rate of return and alleviating people out of poverty was made a long time ago. And groups like the World Bank or the Asian Development Bank or the African Development Bank, they account for very tiny percentages, very minuscule percentages of the overall financing in any given country, but because it's public finance, we need to be scrutinized and should be scrutinized for the types of investment. But these roadways are going up in urban centers, in interurban centers, interurban areas. If you go to India alone, the amount of road building that is going on, or West or East Africa, it's just astronomical. And so I think as a global movement, we are trying to do everything we can in working with partners, international partners from countries that are well performing, in partnering with researchers, in partnering with other international institutions, and partnering with the UN to get the message out about trying to do these investments smartly, to try to ensure that the roadways are built with infrastructure that can save lives, to try as best we can to get the enforcement message out there, and to try to steer our own investments, again, through grant financing if necessary, but ideally as a mainstream business item, that road safety is beneficial to alleviating poverty, to boosting shared prosperity. And that message is more strong now than it ever has been, but there's a long way to go. We're in the Sustainable Development Goals now, but we have to remember we've just come out of the Millennium Development Goals, the MDGs from early 2000. Transportation was completely left off, and that was a real shame. Now, it's great that transportation and road safety in particular actually has a target in the Sustainable Development Goals, but the politicization of road safety is a very tough sell for a variety of reasons. So our job as a development bank is to try to do the best we can to ensure the investments that we're making don't kill. But more than that, try to ensure that the understanding, whether it's just appealing to the economics of good road safety or trying to ensure that a far-reaching politician understands that saving lives is the right thing to do, that we're getting people into alternative modes of transport when and where we can, and ensuring when those countries are developing these roadways, and they are quickly, that they're done in as safe way as possible. So we have time for another round of questions. The audience, one over there and one over there.
Yeah, hi, my name's Dick Hewling. My claim to fame is that I know Debbie. First of all, thank you very much for being here. I have to admit that the Ray is very interesting because it really appeals to imagination. And my imagination, as you were just talking, said, solar-powered roads, solar roads. You don't need headlights anymore. The solar power can be stored and used for lights. And smart roads and smart cars would work together so that the lights were only on when you were going by if it was otherwise an underutilized road. And the other thought that I had was something that I mentioned earlier, and that is that zero is kind of a real interesting target, if you will, or a goal. And there is a paper that I will send to Debbie, and hopefully she'll put it up. It's called Zero's Not a Number. It's a way of thinking. And if we ever get to zero by 2050, I'll be 109 years old, so we have to figure a way to get there for me. But I just want to say thank you so much for being there and sharing your stuff. One thing I will say about crashes is that whatever else we do for that crash, it's too late. We need to start thinking about ways to change people's behavior when there's a human driver involved and make it so that automatic vehicles just simply can't have a crash. And that's probably the best way we'll get to zero. But changing people's behavior in the aviation business is primarily because they take data from every operation. When there's no crash, no bent metal, no scraped paint. And that's non-crash data that really leads to long-term thinking and solutions. So that's just, that's not really a question. That's an observation.
Thank you. One from that side of the room, please.
Yes, my question is for Dr. Klinich. Your analysis was very interesting, so I was just curious as far as, you know, what's from the automaker perspective, the safety measures, and I think your socioeconomic analysis, that sounds like the next phase is going to be really interesting, but is that helping to lead maybe the automakers to implement more of these safety measures quicker, or is there pushback, and how's that working from that perspective?
Hi, my name's Darren Buck. I'm with the Alexandria Complete Streets program, and a lot of my day-to-day is dealing with countermeasures that we've been discussing a lot. I wanted to ask a question that the intern up front from USDOT asked in sort of a different way. The 2009 recession was one of the greatest causes, as far as I know, of one of the biggest roadway safety gains in our country's history. The drop in per capita and overall VMT gave us great safety gains. If we put VMT, whether per capita or overall, into a great framework like Dr. Klinich did, I'm wondering where would it rank, and where does mode shift and VMT reduction fall in terms of being a safety strategy?
Thanks so much. Dr. Klinich, I think both of those questions might be in your wheelhouse.
So we have been interested in the 2009 drop in fatalities. I think one of the findings when people have reviewed that is that the recession had the most effect on the worst drivers. So teenagers and elderly had the greatest reduction, and so that was why it was even more drastic than just kind of, even though there was an overall VMT, it reduced the driving of the worst drivers, which was a factor in there. So I know that one of the things that we have tossed out is, could you put in, as a countermeasure, making gas $5 a gallon, because it would reduce driving, and with that, was that a countermeasure that we it would also encourage electric vehicle use, but that it could be considered as a safety thing. So we haven't tried that yet, but it's possible. So with regard to the other question, so I think you can see ESC is one of the most effective things, and ESC was voluntarily adopted by, if you look at that, once it started, it has a huge effect on reducing rollovers. So you saw that ESC technologies were implemented on SUVs. As soon as they invented that, it was pretty widespread voluntarily by the vehicle manufacturers. And though it's required now, a lot of vehicles had that before it was officially required. And then I guess I'm not sure of my dates, but I'm fairly sure that all the vehicle manufacturers have agreed to implement automatic emergency braking on their own before, I think they were kind of expecting this to come up with it, and they just kind of came up with, let's all just do it. And I don't know if they thought doing that would help make the regulation regarding AEBs less cumbersome, but they're just going to do it. So I think they've seen some demonstrations of that. We just did an upgrade to Utmost before this, where we had some new data to look at the lane keeping things. And this is kind of the first time where we've seen the lane keeping kind of pop up to one of the most effective. But I guess once you get rid of the runoff roads and the control loss crashes, the next thing left are crossing center line fatalities. So I think that's why we see the lane keeping assistance do that. So I think we just kind of published that a year ago, February. So I think it's coming through, and we're trying to share the tool and publicize it more widely. It's a little hard to actually publish it as a journal article, because it's our best guess with the data we have, and the data we have a lot of limitations. But it's not like we can validate our predictions. So so I guess we're trying to go through venues like this to get people thinking about it.
Thanks so much. I'm going to reserve the one quick question for our colleagues at the Ray now. Your work in many respects started with a very strong act of philanthropy. The road safety community generally, I would say worldwide, struggles for getting the types of grants that we're seeing and talking about today. In your opinion, have you found, or what would you do if you were to be able to get in front of a Bill Gates or any other strong philanthropic mind that is working in fields where, say, keeping children alive from 0 to 5, but we know after that road traffic fatalities are the #1 killer of young people. Do you feel there's a particularly effective approach that one might take in approaching the philanthropic field for road safety? Actually, it's to any of our panelists.
The philanthropy at the table is struggling to answer your question.
And I think we are, and I think that's maybe the problem, actually. And I think that's also why this grants program is so absolutely needed in the United States, and worldwide we need a lot more as well.
I do feel like we're a lone wolf out there. You don't see a lot of philanthropic money going into roads and life safety. So, I mean, we are very different than the majority, but it sure would be great if we could inspire other foundations, like you said, the Gates Foundation or somebody else that is willing to put money into highway infrastructure. And I think it's a brilliant idea. I would love to see more people jump on board with what we're doing. Our foundation is not as big as something like that. That's why we're really careful and conscious about what technologies we do put on our highway. But what's really great is our partnership ability. If somebody really has something extremely cool to offer, we will give them the place to test it, which I think that adds a lot of value. But I would love to see more foundations begin to put money into transportation safety.
I would just add, we are trying to leverage other private sector money as well. So when we first started the Ray as a nonprofit foundation, we were subsisting primarily off of philanthropic dollars, but we set a very large table for other private sector partners to join us, and we as the convener of that funding table, can accept private dollars to fund demonstrations of technologies, and have this year begun to also accept public dollars for co-sponsoring demonstrations with the government in the state of Georgia. And so it's that broad model that I think we've been focused on, the P3 in terms of building infrastructure and maintaining infrastructure for a long time. This is simply the addition of another P, philanthropy. And we didn't come up with the 4 Ps at the Ray. This is something that, you know, Rockefeller's been doing through the 100 Resilient Cities program by using philanthropy to fund an expansion of public and private work through execution. So that's the model that we're following at the Ray, but we feel like doing it in the transportation sector towards infrastructure projects as a P4 might be a new way forward for injecting more technology into a sector that has been stubbornly deficient of technology and innovation and advancements over the last couple of decades, when that same technology and innovation has been changing everything else about the world around us. We joke, with no offense to the systems operators, that the microwave does a little bit more critical thinking and is more technologically advanced than most of our roadways. You know, we've got smart kitchens that are smarter than our roads, and that's a problem. And that problem is really an opportunity for us to hustle technology into the transportation sector in a way that preserves core missions of the infrastructure, in a way that improves safety and improves efficiency. We don't want to endanger any of those things. Technology has to add to the scenario, not take away from it. But we need to hustle existing technology into the transportation sector as quickly as possible. And maybe it takes 4 Ps to do that, not just 3.
Thanks so much. As we invite Debbie back up to the podium, I'd like to thank in particular Susan for her leadership in putting together this panel. And I'd like the audience to thank our panelists today for their very innovative presentations. Thank you.
Well, Dick Healing, who's a former NTSB board member who was here when I first joined the board, said his claim to fame was knowing me, but I feel like my claim to fame is the opportunity to know all of you. Oh my gosh, I was so blown away. You guys are amazing. Harriet, your dad will be so proud of you. You're doing amazing things. Allie, wow, just wow. That is so cool. I just can't imagine that most people who drive on our roads can even imagine the things that are possible. What you guys are doing on the Ray is just super exciting. And I just want more people to know about what you're doing. Emmy Coe, thank you for making it so personal. When we talk about going into communities and just thinking about whether it's legislators, the young people who are working on understanding road safety, when we talk about getting to 0 by 2050, it's not because people are going to make the right decisions today. It's because we're training people to make the right decisions in 20 years. And they're going to understand that safety culture, and it's going to become that goal that we're trying to achieve. Captain, thank you for giving us the tools. So many smart people working on these problems are going to be what takes that data, makes it usable, makes it understandable, and helps us make the right investments and the right decisions. I think these are just such great examples when we talk about the Road to Zero Coalition. Every time we have a meeting, I'm just blown away. This is work that is so important, and so many people are working on it together. So getting to 0 by 2050 is the right goal and what we want to do. Mark, thank you for leading this auspicious panel and for the work that you are doing. We always have to remember what our place in the world is and how we help everyone. And I think that means helping people in communities across the country, helping transfer technology, helping raise the bar on safety. We learn from other people in other locations in the world, just like they can learn from us. So I think we have a presentation just to wrap it up. So this picture was taken at our last coalition meeting in this room. For those of you who all were a part of it, I think I've shared with you that I hope throughout this journey that by 2050 we have some sort of Hidden Figures movie that talks about how we got to 0 fatalities on our roadways by 2050, and when people think that's the way it always was, that they understand that all of the people who are part of this process are the hidden figures to get us to that goal, our moonshot of getting to 0 fatalities. I need to say thank you to a few people. When we really envisioned this Road to Zero coalition, it was about 18 to 24 months ago, working with our partners at US DOT. There were many people who raised their hands and many organizations who stepped up to be on our steering group. We're getting to a point of maturity. We've released our vision report, and we're going to be rotating some of those members of our steering group off. And so I just want to say a couple of thank yous to people who have been with us and committed a lot of time and effort, and I see a few of them are sitting over there. Adrian Lund is retired. He's a former leader of IIHS, and Adrian, it's so nice to have you continue to be our consigliere and our emeritus leader. Thank you for IIHS leadership and their continued leadership. We look forward to continuing to work with you. Adrienne Gildea with CVSA, also on our steering group. She was actually under the weather today, participated on our steering group call by phone. The Commercial Vehicle Safety Alliance has been an important partner on the steering group. Jonathan Atkins, and I see Russ Martin, who's here with the Governor's Highway Safety Association. Again, another one of our charter leaders on the steering group, an absolute fantastic partner. And we know that all of these individuals, even though they may be rotating off the steering group, are still going to be our partners in this effort and this mission. Today, John Bozello with Global Automakers, Brian Roberts with the National Association of County Engineers, and J.T. Griffin and Debbie Weir of MAD are not with us in the room, but they are also rotating off the steering group, and we want to extend our thanks and appreciation to them. I would be remiss if I didn't recognize our staff, Jane, Terry, and Susan Crotty, who have worked on this initiative since the very beginning. Jane is going to be stepping back, and Alex Epstein, who's here. Alex, if you could just stand up so everyone could say hello to you, is going to be taking on additional responsibilities for the National Safety Council on the Road to Zero, and Susan is going to continue to ensure we are awesome. Today I heard someone say that we had over 600 members. Well, we actually have over 740 now, and Susan works very closely with so many people. I know many of you at the table have been introduced to me by Susan, but we look forward to continuing to grow the coalition into the future. I wanted to share with you our final 2018 grant recipients. In March, we announced the first set of recipients with the $1 million. We actually received another $500,000. Renee announced that at our last meeting, and we were able to award those grants in the interim. And so this list is the complete list of the 2018 grant recipients. So we wanted to make sure we shared that with you. We are also continuing to release Road to Zero priority statements, and these statements are really focused on areas that our coalition is bringing to us. We already have statements on things like occupant protection. Two that have been approved since our last meeting have to do with two different issues: truck underride and impairment. So I wanted to make sure you all knew that we had these statements out there. They're available on the website. I want to recognize Mary Ann Carth and Lois Durso. They have been at almost every Road to Zero coalition meeting that we've had. They worked hard on that truck underride statement. And when we think about truck underrides, it's rear underride, front underride, side underride protection, and how all of the road users on the road interact with all of the others. That statement is available on our website, and we want to make sure that everyone knows that those tools are out there. On the impairment side, I think I saw Brandy here earlier. She might have left, but Brandy at FAR and JT at MAD worked on those statements along with a number of other stakeholders. We could reduce 7,000 fatalities on our roadways if no drivers exceeded the legal blood alcohol limit, which is 0.08. That's a huge number. Inside the priority statement for alcohol impairment, there's a number of different countermeasures. We'd encourage everyone to review our priority statements and help us to advance those issues to drive down fatalities. So how do we shift safety culture? I think that's been a conversation that we've had since the very get-go. How do we make sure that we demand 100% safe operations on our roadways, just like we expect with the pipelines that run under our communities and the aviation system and other modes of transportation that we use? When we look at how the United States compares to the rest of the world, we know that in the last 20 years, this is work that was done by CDC, we know that in the last 20 years, the gains that the United States has made are not enough. And we know, and Mark, this comes from our international counterparts. While these are our industrialized counterparts, they are reducing fatalities at a clip faster than we are in the United States. So there's missed opportunities, there's things that we can do, and we need to accelerate those changes to ensure that we reduce the fatalities on our roadways. Chairman Sumwalt, thank you so much. I looked back at some point in the meeting, I realized you were still with us. I thought you left after you gave your remarks, and so thank you for being with us here. We really value the work that your team is doing and your presence. If I asked everyone to raise their hands, how many of you all are familiar with the fatality that occurred this spring involving Southwest Passenger? Is there anybody who isn't familiar with this? So when we talk about safety culture, this is where we see big differences in how the public, how policymakers, how we all react. We had a single fatality on a flight involving a passenger. That was the first fatality involving a U.S. domestic air carrier since February of 2009. One fatality in 9 years, and everybody in this room knew about it. It was on the news. It was probably talked about for a week. There were investigations. There were calls from Congress for redoubling inspections and maybe some additional oversight. Why? Because that death was a tragedy. Because that death was preventable. Did we overreact to one fatality in aviation in 9 years? Absolutely not. We didn't overreact. We did exactly what we should do. What we do is we underreact to the 100 fatalities that occur every day on our roadways that are also tragedies and preventable. So when we talk about shifting safety culture, it's about understanding that our mindset has become complacent and has become accepting. And how do we begin to shift that conversation? So Emiko, in 20 years, those kids that you're educating about how that road diet costs 4 minutes but saves lives, that's the right decision. And when we get to a point where we choose safety first, like they do in aviation, over everything else, when they ground flights and lose revenue to do inspections because of a safety concern, then we'll know that we can get to zero. So when we talk about shifting safety culture, we have a lot of work to do. We did create an awesome vision to do that with the help of so many people in this room. I'm looking at Dave in the back and the many conversations that we had, about how to get to a good place on some of the decisions that we were making. I'm looking at the many people who sat in listening sessions that contributed their expertise. We made sure that we had copies, hard copies available for you. Please take them for your board, take them for your partners that you work with. This is going to be our blueprint for how we get to zero fatalities in the next 20 years. We talked a little bit about it at the last meeting, but we're going to come back to those 3 priorities: doubling down on those countermeasures that we know work, accelerating the technology that Dick referred to that's really going to be that catalyst, that game changer. And I know Robert educated me, Chairman Sumwalt educated me for many years about the gains that we made in aviation because of enhanced ground proximity warning systems, or TCAS, the collision avoidance systems. Technology can be a game changer, and it can drive those numbers down. And the last piece is really understanding how we create a safety culture and embrace a safe systems approach. It's not going to be something that happens overnight, but we're going to work really hard to make sure that it happens, and we really can realize that 0 fatalities by 2050. So, Deidre, I know we have a video that we put together that you're going to help me play to share that vision. Thank you.
Imagine her world in the year 2050. A colony on Mars, bloodless surgery, clean, sustainable energy. The future makes almost anything possible, including 0 roadway deaths.
I am confident we can do this together. We must. And the groundwork that this organization, this coalition has built together over the years will be a key part of that.
3 strategies will lead the way. Countermeasures that work have already saved thousands of lives. We will double down on what we know works.
We shouldn't forget about tried and true non-tech interventions that are out there also ready to be used.
In 30 years, from 1994 to 2014, miles traveled increased 35%, yet traffic fatalities decreased by 5%. Countermeasures work. Safety belts and airbags, DUI checkpoints and laws, red light cameras, traffic roundabouts, and child restraint systems. The Road to Zero will accelerate the development of advanced driver assistance systems, or ADAS. Human drivers are fallible. Drivers are tired. Drivers are impaired. Drivers are distracted. Smart machines are not. New ADAS technology is being added to new cars every day at all price levels. Car makers have voluntarily agreed to add AEB, automatic emergency braking, to all new cars by 2022.
There's really a remarkable number of technologies that are really coming way down in price. So camera technologies that can have special, essentially computer vision that look out ahead of you and can detect stopped cars and threats, pedestrians that are about to cross in front of you.
Human behavior is such that only technology can override the poor choices that people make when they're operating a vehicle.
Culture and behaviors can change.
We can seek to make safety a priority within our personal lives, within our businesses, corporations, associations, our neighborhoods, schools.
50 years ago, people freely littered. Millions smoked in public. The use of safety belts was not the norm. People can change. The Road to Zero requires a rigorous adoption of safety culture.
Safety needs to be a priority. It needs to be part of our culture.
Si uno cree, es posible hacerlo.
Today, her future is already on the road to zero. The map is clear. Evidence-based solutions are being funded. The journey has begun.
Achieving 0 roadway fatalities is not impossible. It just hasn't been done yet. This is our generation's moonshot. All right, Hidden Figures, thank you for being part of our moonshot. And for those of you who were at Lifesavers or part of the Lifesavers decision-making process, thank you very much for letting us present. We were very fortunate to have a great crowd and great response in Texas. in April when we released the Vision Zero report. And this is just an example of one of our partners, IAHS, and our communication strategy post-release of the report to help keep this message out there. How do we continue to move towards implementation, prioritization, and beating the drum? And so we have a communications toolkit. It's available on the Road to Zero website. I would encourage all of you to utilize the toolkit. It helps you to use social media, communications with your internal stakeholders, however you'd like to do that. And please know that through Susan and our team, we stand ready to assist you in whatever way we can. We're going to be doing a Twitter chat and also a thunderclap in August. And if you don't know what a thunderclap is, it's not a dance. So the future of zero is really going to take all of us, and we're going to have to address all the issues. We're going to have to address the human. We're going to have to address the machine. We're going to have to address the environment and our roadways. But we're also going to have to take a look in the mirror and check ourselves and address what our attitudes and behaviors and perceptions are about this, and help to advocate with everyone that we know about the things that we know that are going to get us to zero. Our next meeting is actually going to be at a new location. We've been so fortunate to have so many great partners. We were at Kaiser Permanente at their facility. We've been at NTSB for the last 2 meetings. We have another partner who's going to be working with us on our next meeting. And just to give you a little preview, we're going to have a panel that's going to be focused on law enforcement, among other things, at the next coalition meeting. So we look forward to seeing you in September, and I hope you all have a wonderful and safe summer. Remember, this is the deadliest time out there on the roadways, so if you're traveling for vacation or just commuting or exercising, be safe out there. Thank you.